I call this meeting to order. The time is 6:01 p.m. This is a meeting of the City of Berkeley's Reimagining Public Safety Task Force. Today is Wednesday, June 30th, 2021. Pursuant to Section 3 of Executive Order N2920 issued by Governor Newsom on March 17th, 2020, this meeting of the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force will be conducted exclusively through teleconference and Zoom video conference. Please be advised that pursuant to the executive order and to ensure the health and safety of the public by limiting human contact that could spread the COVID-19 virus, there will be no physical meeting location available. To access the meeting remotely, you can use a computer, your phone, and access the given URL, or if you're dialing in, you can call the listed number 669-900-9128 and enter the provided meeting ID. Yeah, if we could call roll, please.
Commissioner Fine.
Present.
Commissioner Jigu.
Present.
Vice Chair Chima.
Here.
Commissioner Blake. Commissioner Lindheim.
Here.
Commissioner Dangerfield. Commissioner Ghosh.
Here.
Commissioner Hyde.
Here.
Commissioner Malvito.
Here.
Chair Mizell.
Here.
Commissioner Upton.
Present.
Commissioner Harger.
Present. And I just want to let y'all know I might have to turn off my camera. My Wi-Fi is very bad. No disrespect intended. It's nice to see you guys.
Thank you. Commissioner Diaz. Commissioner Lutzker.
Here.
And Commissioner Ho.
Here.
Thank you.
Yeah. We'll go to.
Hi,
public.
sorry, I didn't hear my name called. I was in the bathroom. I'm here though.
Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Polk, I'm actually sending you an email right now. So if you could watch your email, you'll get a communication from myself and Shamika. You'll see my email.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, if we could go to public comment, please. Oh. Looks like we have one hand.
Shamika, can you manage that for a second?
Yes, I'm sorry. One moment. Sorry, guys, managing a bunch of windows open. Thank you. We have, Chair, we have one hand raised. And Kelly Hammergren, you should be able to speak.
Okay, the unmute button finally appeared. Thank you very much. I read the book Tangled Up in Blue, Policing the American City last week. And I thought it was absolutely fascinating. Rosa Brooks, the author, was on the DC police force as a reserve officer, and she receives the same training, certification, and responsibilities as the full-time regular traditional officers. That's the way DC has a reserve volunteer police force. and they're required to work 24 hours a month, all volunteer. And after 4 years, she wrote the book, Tangled Up in Blue, Policing the American City, about her experiences and some suggestions. Rosa Brooks is also a law professor at Georgetown University. So it was interesting in that it really gave a much better insight into some of the experiences of policing by her personal telling of the story. And I just would like to recommend that you all, if you have a chance, pick it up from our Berkeley Library. The other thing I listened to was Criminal Injustice. It's one of my favorite podcasts. And the last podcast, number 140, was a discussion on data on policing. And it was interesting that in their research, they were finding that only 4% of the calls were on mental health, and that took about 1 to 2% of the police time, but mental health is like 1 in 4 of the calls that results in fatalities. Anyway, I thought that was interesting information. You might want to look it up and see how that compares with Berkeley. Thank you.
And there are no more hands, Chair.
Thank you. In that case, we will go right into approval of the minutes. There any comments about the minutes on June 10th? If not, I'll motion to approve the minutes. Second for anybody.
Second the motion.
Thank you.
Motion to approve the minutes. Commissioner Fine,
Yes.
Vice Chair Chima,
Yes.
Commissioner Blake, Commissioner Linheim, I believe I have a yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Sorry.
thank you. No worries. Commissioner Dangerfield, Commissioner Ghosh, Commissioner Ghosh, Commissioner Hyde,
Yes.
Commissioner Malvido,
Yes.
Chair Mizell,
Yes.
Commissioner Opton,
Yes.
Commissioner Harger,
Yes.
Commissioner Diaz, Commissioner Lutzker,
Yes.
and Commissioner Ho.
Yes.
And I'll call Commissioner Ghosh one more time.
What are we voting on? Sorry, I had to step away.
The minutes of June 10th.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Mizell.
Thank you. On to subcommittee reports. First from policing, budget, and alternatives to policing.
And you want to do this, Pam, or me? I'm asking for volunteers, but not getting any. At least say no.
Since I missed the last meeting, I don't feel
Oh.
quite up to speed on where we're at.
Okay, thanks, Pamela, sorry. What we've been doing is, and I think all of you got the next set of questions that we put together for the chief. And I think we're going to come up with a much better way to do that. But at least we got it done for the questions for the next couple of meetings. And I'm sure that once the first draft of the report comes out, that I'm hoping that subcommittees will have an opportunity to then meet with the community and the people that we know and our constituencies to get feedback on recommendations that, and I'm hoping that we start seeing the first set of recommendations before too long, because we want to give the community, of course, now that the budget is done, people are going to want to pay very close attention to our work. So that's something else that's coming up for us. While the AAPI folks have been talking about, how best to do that listening session, once a piece that has come up is that how closely connected domestic violence or gender bias violence is to also the work that the police does. So later we're going to share that piece with you. So is there anything else I need to say about the police budget? I don't have all the numbers in front of me, but I'm sure David does. And I hope that staff starts to get a little bit more sleep. Thank you.
Thank you, Buna. And then for our second subcommittee, anyone from community engagement want to brief us?
We haven't met. We're in the middle of the listening sessions, and really I think that's going to culminate the community engagement process with the exception of the town hall. Actually, somebody may want to speak to the town hall because we have addressed that. I take it back. We did meet on that. Talking about the citywide survey and presenting some of the results from that survey at a town hall, and then being able to get feedback from the community. But we haven't really talked about the specifics. Are there other people that want to add to that?
Well, we were hoping to have more than one town hall, one virtually on Zoom and one in person. That was something that we discussed, and we're hoping that's possible, even with, COVID restrictions in place. We imagine if we have it outdoors, that it would be safe. Am I right?
Yep, definitely.
We may even be
So
able
I
to go
think
indoors now. I'm not sure there's many COVID restrictions left. I'd have to follow up.
I think the next step for us would be for the subcommittee to meet again and to meet with Cheryl like we did the last time, so we're all on the same page. Do you want to add some more, Abby, to that?
Well, we imagine that, it's important to do 2 town halls, because having one online and having one in person, we expected that we get very different people showing up, and we need the voices of everyone, especially those who would show up, who would be more inclined to show up in person for purposes of equity. Not everybody has, devices, connectivity. Not everybody feels comfortable navigating tech. It is much more approachable for some people to grab a microphone and speak. And we'd also need Spanish translation in those meetings, in those town hall meetings.
And this would be after the listening sessions have concluded and the citywide survey. There are results that can be shared at the town hall, so people have some sense of what has been going on and then can add to that and extend upon what we already have.
And I do think there was a question that was raised about how much the task force would be involved in kind of hosting the town hall. And I don't know, Cheryl, I see you're on. I don't know if that's something that you're planning to raise this evening, and what hosting would look like, and whether there's a desire within the task force members to do so.
Yeah, if I can jump in briefly, and correct me if I'm wrong here, David, but I think if we are to hold the town hall, we have to obviously first decide to do it ourselves. And then I believe it has to go to council for us to be able to hold it. Or can we just hold a special meeting and just open the meeting like a normal meeting and then have that more open discussion and rules suspended?
It's in the contract.
Really good question. Well, I think what the chair's just hitting on is in terms of if there's going to be, so yes, the contract does suppose that there would be a town hall meeting. But I think what the chair is touching on is that if NICJR does it, so long as a quorum of the task force doesn't show up, it can be just a regular town hall, no big deal. But because of the Brown Act, if a quorum of this task force wants to show up or the task force wants to have a role in it, then yes, we'd want to work through the details of that and just coordinate noticing. So you could do like a special meeting notice so that everyone on the task force or a quorum of the task force could attend. The chair's onto something. Once we get more details, we can coordinate that logistically.
Okay, thank you. I guess Luna?
Mute myself. The other way we could do this, if it becomes too complicated with the city, is that each of the subcommittees, and I hope we don't have too many, take that section of the recommendations and then has a town hall as a subcommittee, which doesn't have to be noticed governmentally, but can be, whether, while you're asking these questions, David, please ask if there is any limit on how many people can be invited, or can we do our own outreach? Thanks.
There's no limit. The only limit, well, there's no limits on anyone that can attend. It's just a question of how we it's just the form, so we can enable it to occur. So any numbers of members of the public could attend, depending upon how it's structured. The only constraints we're facing, and I wouldn't even call them constraints, we just want to make sure that we do the right process so that if, for example, like I said, if the entire task force or more than, majority of the task force wants to attend, we just have to make sure that we notice it as a special meeting so all of you can be there. It's not a terrible inconvenience by any stretch. It's just something that as the plans come together, we will just have to work through.
See, at the beginning when we started this process, what we heard from both Nick Jr. and the Bright Institute was how little money there was in the contract to do a real deep dive into the community engagement process. So I'm trying to find ways that where we can step up and do some of those hours. Just a suggestion.
No, I think it's a good one, and definitely something that I imagine the Community Engagement Subcommittee can have a conversation about. Hopefully with Nick Jr. Hopefully we can make sure that conversation happens, so everyone's on the same page. Commissioner Fine. You are muted.
I think one thing that decidedly came up in Abby was beginning to point to this is the inequities between different populations in our city and the need for the one in person and one on Zoom. Part of this goes into the fact that there are district zip code areas that really haven't been participants too much in this process. If we look at the listening sessions and how we've really tried to be inclusive and to focus on different diverse communities. But it raises the question, are there other people who have been inputting as far as the citywide survey where it might be beneficial to tell them what the survey results look like and get their feedback? Because right now, like zip code 94707 was the third highest number of recipients, and it's not a very diverse zip code at all. However, there are questions about policing and mental health crisis and substance use crisis that potentially we may want information. And I don't know if that is a priority or not, but I think that it's important to at least ask the question.
Thank you. Any other comments from subcommittee members? Seeing none, we will go forward to, I guess, our subcommittee discussions, and starting with the Improve and Reinvest subcommittee. Commissioner Fine?
Yes, the reason why I asked to have this subcommittee is starting off with reimagining public safety. Obviously, we're looking at policing, but what are we looking of from the point of view of what's going to take the place of some of that policing? And the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform, their model is reduce, improve, reinvest. And so I said, you know, what do we do to improve and reinvest? And in my mind, there needs to be analysis on equities and disparities and social determinants of health and the types of programming that is supposed to be funded in the budget. And I know just from this month's budget process that some of this is still very much undefined. And I think it's important that there's a subcommittee that focuses on these inequities and disparities and social determinants of health and looks at this in conjunction with the policing and the recommendations that are made for the policing. And I know there are a couple of people who had an interest in this when we talked the last time. This is not a community engagement subcommittee. The community engagement is related directly to getting input on the citywide survey and through the listening session. So it has a distinct purpose in terms of programming in the community. And I think we really need to closely be following this at this time because the budget is not that specific across the board. So I wanted to make a motion to establish an Improve and Reinvest subcommittee for the task force.
Thank you. We have a motion.
I second that motion.
Thank you. Motion in a second.
Who seconded? Was that Commissioner Ho?
Yes.
Thank you.
What was the motion?
To create the Improve and Reinvest subcommittee. Okay, any further discussion, commissioners? Vice Chair?
Yeah, I just had a question of Dr. Fine. You said three things, right? That they're in everything that we've seen from Nick Jr.'s firm. It's three things. Reinvest, and you mentioned two, but I don't think you mentioned the third one.
The first one is reduce. So reduce the policing, improve what we have. And it's like reallocation, but reinvest in programs and services that by reducing, we're able to reinvest.
So you're saying, okay, so you're saying not a subcommittee, but more like a think tank.
Well, I think, I don't know that it's a think tank because we would still have recommendations.
Yeah, okay. So for us to have recommendations, David, don't we have to be a formal subcommittee of the commission?
I believe that's what
Yes.
Task Force Member Fine is asking to create as a formal subcommittee. That's what I'm understanding.
Yeah.
Okay.
The motion's to establish and improve and reinvest subcommittee. And that's to look at the programs and services, and particularly the equities, disparities, and social determinants of health.
Yeah. And Margaret's done a lot of work on this. So I don't think it's going to be a subcommittee that's going to take 6 months to get this done.
No.
So, and the vote comes with.
Okay, any other discussion on creating the subcommittee? Then we can discuss membership.
Can I clarify that it's, I missed the second half of it. It's a subcommittee that's focused on alternatives in a specific area.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Like the social and health inequities, disparities, and social determinants of health. It's really designed for that public health. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Ms. Cole, if you can call the roll, please.
Sure. Commissioner Fine,
Yes.
Commissioner Jigu,
Yes.
Vice Chair Chima,
Yes.
Commissioner Blake, Commissioner Linheim,
Yes.
Commissioner Dangerfield, Commissioner Ghosh,
Yes.
Commissioner Hyde,
Yes.
Commissioner Malvito,
Yes.
Chair Mizell,
Yes.
Commissioner Opton,
Yes.
Commissioner Harger,
Yes.
Commissioner Diaz,
Yes.
Commissioner Lutzker,
Yes.
Commissioner Ho.
Yes.
Motion carries, Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Fine, given that it was your item, asked, would you prefer for us to discuss membership right now or have the discussion about the creation of an AAPI Community Engagement Subcommittee first, and then have a...
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't catch you, Nathan. I apologize for that.
Oh, no problem. I was just asking, would you prefer if we go to membership for your subcommittee right now, or have the conversation about the AAPI Community Engagement Subcommittee, and then have a full conversation about membership for both subcommittees?
Can we get the input of Vice Chair Chima too here? I need a little clarification.
What do you need?
I believe that we're talking about the membership of this new subcommittee, and then the AAPI.
For now,
You're
let's
muted.
keep them separate. Let's finish this discussion
Okay.
and get the membership for this group, because that's really a little different.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Thanks, Margaret.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Members interested in being on the Improve and Reinvest Subcommittee, please make yourself known.
This is Commissioner Ho. I've been waiting for this subcommittee to be formed so I could put my name in the hat. And specifically, I would really like to bring to the table, ideas around how to address gender-based violence through alternatives for people who are not going to engage with the police for help.
Mm.
Thank you.
And I want to volunteer.
Any other commissioners?
I will also volunteer to be on that.
Thank you, Commissioner Lutzker.
And me, I forgot.
Okay. And the vice chair. Okay. Any other members interested at this time?
So just to confirm, it's Commissioner Ho, Commissioner Fine, Commissioner Lutzker, Commissioner Chima, Vice Chair Chima?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm also sorry for the delay. This is Commissioner Mardido. I'm also interested in being a part of this.
Okay.
Noted.
Commissioner Malvido as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
If we still have
Sorry?
space too, I'd like to be on that commission or that subcommittee.
Yes,
Noted,
we
Commissioner
should.
Diaz. Great. Okay, so we have our list. Thank you for bringing it, Commissioner Fine. Obviously, very important work, and you're a perfect person to lead that work. So thank you for taking that on. Next up, subcommittee discussion on the AAPI Community Engagement Subcommittee.
Francis is going to lead that, and then Bernali and I will follow up.
Great, thank you. So I'm first going to kind of share just what we've talked about. Vice Chair Chima, Commissioner Ghosh, and I have met several times since the last meeting to think about this idea of having an AAPI listening session, just a general listening session. And what the three of us really wanted to focus on are the most vulnerable members of our community. And we thought the best way to do that was to actually focus on gender-based violence, which includes domestic violence, intimate partner violence, sexual abuse, and human trafficking issues. We do think it's going to be challenging in general under non-pandemic circumstances. It is hard to get victim survivors into a space, into a listening session. We also don't want to re-traumatize people by asking them to tell their stories if they don't need to. And I think that was discussed at the last meeting at length. And we think that there is already a wealth of knowledge out there in our community-based organizations. So what we've talked about is this idea of having a listening session just for the community-based organizations that provide services to victims and survivors of gender-based violence. There's so much that they can tell us in terms of gaps in services, where they're under-resourced, where the community is under-resourced, and what their clients need to be safe. That is certainly going to give us a service provider perspective, but that perspective has a lot, there's a lot of expertise there. We also are interested, I think, in looking at and bringing forth to this committee in very short, concise presentations, asking folks to talk about alternative models, right? Like ones that are not engaging in the system, the court system, the criminal justice system, models that maybe focus on working with the person that's caused harm. We know that there's not a lot of those programs available. Possibly Oakland's new Department of Violence Prevention, which just got millions of dollars in funding. So our goal would be to host this listening session for providers who serve these victims and survivors in our community here in Berkeley and generally in the Bay Area. And I think we're really going to be able to get at, the pain points, the barriers like language access or, issues that come up based on actual or perceived immigration status, things that are going to help not just us identify issues for some members of the AAPI communities, but other communities in Berkeley. I think there is this procedural question of how can we go forth and do this work. The three of us are interested in hosting this listening session. I think Vice Chair Chima talked about, just managing the resources that we have at our disposal. And we could easily put together this listening session ourselves through our contacts in the community. So whether we need a subcommittee to do that work or not, I guess is a question that we have. And Vice Chair and Commissioner Ghosh, please feel free to jump in.
Vice Chair Chima, did you have something you want to say?
No, you go first.
I'll
wrap it up.
Yeah, I'll just say that I think one of the things that was challenging for us in thinking of AAPI is just how many, it kind of feels like a other group. I think that's something we sort of struggled with. I think there are many people we could talk to, everybody from like store owners who can be South Asian, East Asian. We can talk to the student population. So there are groups that we could bring in under the API umbrella. But I think, like Francis said, we're trying to strategically manage our resources so we, sort of zeroed in on this idea of gender-based violence as something that would eventually benefit our communities and other communities, but really goes into the nuances. And I think specifically, thanks to Francis's expertise, and of course, Vice Chair Buna Chima's expertise as well, that we are able to come up with, the gap that we noticed or that we're seeing, which is folks who don't call the police. And a lot of that tends to be immigrants who are not quite sure how calling the police might play out for them. So I think that's sort of what we're looking at. Alternative ways to provide safety to people in our communities who may not call the police for various reasons, structural fear, all of that. Yeah, and thank you so much, Francis, for like bringing your expertise and your connections. I think I've been interested in it, but really I think both Vice Chair Chima and Commissioner Ho have a lot of experience in this, and I think it'll be a really valuable addition to the recommendations.
We also, on our own, have sort of been touching in with our communities and also people that provide the services. And one of the questions that I think all of us have been asking is, do you think we will lose something if people who are survivors don't show up to tell their story? And they were like, of course, we always lose something, but here we're talking about lots of languages, lots of countries, lots of people. And also we kept thinking about, is there one issue that goes beyond language, that goes beyond which country you come from, and that is sort of universal to all our, not just the API communities, but also other communities, and that if we have it through the CBOs, that would be the safest place to hear at least the experiences of the most amount of people, because they serve everybody. So that's sort of where we are at with that, and very excited about it, actually. And also, we found out that there is in the Berkeley Police Department an officer that is designated to domestic violence. And that I think it's a gentleman that he works very closely with, of course, once the police work is done, then actually the big work starts. The healing, the housing, the income, how do we get, the needs of the perpetrator, whatever. And of course, the tremendous needs of survivors. We would love to hear from him. I don't know his name, but one of the organizations at least works very, very closely with him, a DV organization that the city of Berkeley funds. So it'd be somehow either the police subcommittee or the entire task force needs to hear from the people even in BPD who are actually doing good work or doing community work. And we heard that this person was particularly good. I don't know if that's the word she used, but I'm using it. So that's where we are at. Please give us a lot of feedback.
And I should say there's a procedural question. So, and if we are a subcommittee, other people are welcome to join, since we've brought, it doesn't have to be just the API members. I think anybody who's interested in this issue, we would be happy to have your participation and involvement.
And we have met twice with Bright Institute, right? We've met with them twice on this issue? Yes. Yeah, Cheryl once, and then someone else wants.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I guess this question is, how would the subcommittee structure serve y'all, and whether that's the best way to do it? Because I'm thinking, two of you I know very well already, and I'm sure Commissioner Ho, y'all can do great things with or without this commission. So I guess where do you see the subcommittee fitting in? Because I'm thinking, like, if you hold the listening session, I guess without the commission, those specific topics at the listening session aren't agendized, and it wouldn't be a quorum of the commission. So you definitely could do it without us. Is it you want part of that to become the recommendations that are seen at a certain level, or I'm really kind of just asking and seeing.
Chair, can I step in for a second?
Yes.
So normally the listening sessions are coordinated through our consultant, Nick Jr., but because our 3 members would like to hold the listening sessions on their own, we would consider it a subcommittee. Thereby, there would need to be a vote of this task force to establish the AAPI subcommittee in order to hold the listening session.
Okay, well, I guess if it were to formally connect to this process, I guess the point I'm making is the members could go on their own and do this and, submit either findings or, talk about the experience with us. And that would obviously all go to us and the public. But I guess that wouldn't be officially a part of this process, though certainly that would be something we consider either way. So,
if you don't mind, Chair,
yeah,
I would think that it needs to be part of this process, because if we're engaging with providers, we're going to say this is our goal, this is part of the reimagining process, so they understand why they're there. So I think we would want to, be formal, a formal part of the process.
Okay, sounds good. I guess those were my questions, comments. Any other commissioners?
Yes, I was going to ask if it needs, I wasn't thinking of it as an AAPI subcommittee. I was thinking of it specific to the, how do you all feel about that, I guess?
That's what I was thinking. I wasn't just thinking just an API/gender violence, domestic violence. And Francis, asking you also, I think we were all thinking that this would just be of great value in terms of seeing what changes can be made or what new strategies can be used to, get this particular very marginalized population services and resources as part of the reimagining process. Whether that Berkeley does not have any shelter for DV. It has one daytime drop-in center that DV folks drop into for case management. And then it has organizations in, Contra Costa, Oakland. The one I think in Oakland actually has the contract with Berkeley. So yes, I think I was thinking it a little bigger also.
Would we lose anything from being part of the Improving and Reinvesting group, since 2 of us are there? Could we do it out of that subcommittee, or do you think we need a standalone subcommittee?
I think you could do it as part of that, and that's why I wasn't sure whether I should volunteer or not. But we could do it as part of that if Commissioner Fine is open to that.
Just count those numbers so we know how many more can join tonight if we go that direction. I think you have
Commissioner
6.
Fine.
Yeah, I feel that, intimate partner violence, the human trafficking, it cuts across demographic populations. It's important that the populations you've identified that really have been devastated by this have the space to be able to get the services that they need. And at the same time, there are probably additional populations that need those same resources. So of course it would fit really well, but I don't want you to feel like your work isn't being held, you know. I'm there, most certainly the whole notion of having family violence, intimate partner violence, sexual abuse, human trafficking, violence prevention, all of those things are critical to improving and reinvesting.
So my suggestion, actually, I'm going to sort of step back and say that we do a broad API outreach and have us focus on whatever we want and keep it flexible. And then we can add more things or less things at this point. But what we're saying is we're going to move forward with the focus on gender-based violence. And that gives us flexibility. It requires less scheduling and all of that. And I don't see any reason not to have another subcommittee because it's this commission's time is limited. So having lots of subcommittees feels fine to me as long as we have a very clear goal. So
subcommittees don't always last the life of the commission.
Right.
We can stop when the work is done.
Yeah.
You also have the community engagement subcommittee too to work with that.
Right, but neither Francis nor I are on that. And part of the challenge has been that subcommittee assignments were always happening at the end of very long meetings when Commissioner Francis couldn't stay until. So we don't see us using that right now.
There's only 6 members on the community engagement subcommittee, so there's room at the moment for at least one more.
I think the challenge of that is we get into other Brown Act issues. If they were to speak to me, then that would, and yeah. I don't know why we have to struggle so much with just creating a subcommittee. I'm seeing Commissioner Fine's hand up. So,
yeah, I mean, if you need a subcommittee, I really have it because there are nuances and complexities to the AAPI population and looking at gender that potentially you want to make sure that the resources and services are there. And there's also the option you can bring it up in a wider context in the improve and reinvest. I just don't want you to lose that those subtleties aren't lost.
Okay. Vice Chair Chima, since it is some paper your item.
Okay. My question is, how many people are on subcommittee, Margaret? The engagement one.
Okay, there are 6.
So there are 2 openings there.
Liza, Abby, Hector, Margaret, Alicia, and Paul, maybe.
I thought Bernali was on that too.
No.
No.
I think it's Paul, Alicia, Liza, Hector, Margaret, and Abby.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So Hector had raised his hand and wanted to be part of this new subcommittee if we create it, right, Hector?
That's correct, Vice Chair. I also just wanted to highlight that, if it's necessary to make a new commission, then let's do it. I'm happy to second a motion for that, like right now, like 5 minutes ago. But also, if there needs more space to be a majority of AAPI folks in these community engagement subcommittee, I'm also happy to withdraw myself from that committee altogether, so that Bernali and other Commissioner Ghosh and other members who want to create another one, whatever makes the process simpler. But all that said is, if there's a motion to make a AAPI community engagement subcommittee, I'm happy to second it.
I'm just trying to look at gender as well. And I really liked that Mr. Commissioner Dias put his hand up and that he was interested in this. So I think it does need a different subcommittee just based on numbers, because some new people want to come in.
Okay. So Vice Chair, do you want to make a motion?
Yes.
The motion is to create a new subcommittee, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the AAPI Gender Violence Subcommittee or just AAPI?
I think I heard AAPI engagement.
Okay.
Engagement, okay.
To have it broad and not.
No, I thought what I
You
heard
want some-
or might have said was domestic and gender violence subcommittee instead of AAPI, but to make it bigger. But I thought that's what Bernali said too, but I'm not sure.
Depending on how often we're meeting, like if we wanted to do anything else under the subcommittee, we would come back and can do it. If we've decided we're focusing on gender-based violence, I'm fine with it being specific to the topic. So let's just say gender. I think we have a lot to cover in that topic. So let's just go with Puna. Do you want to make the motion to?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I guess I'll make a motion to create a subcommittee to provide to study alternatives, solutions to gender-based violence.
Yep.
That's broad enough.
So the gender-based violence subcommittee or the
we are removing a from
comment?
this conversation, and I think that's wise because we don't necessarily agree with that term as an umbrella term. It's not conveying anything for us right now. So if we find that we need something that's specific, then we'll come back.
Can I bring a point up?
Yes, Commissioner.
Once you get into the gender-based violence, because I really truly thought it was AAPI, then we start getting into all the gender variant and transgender, and it becomes a very big topic. And I'm wondering, is that your intention?
I think our intention is to start somewhere, and yeah, and then eventually my understanding is it's all going to sort of get mixed with all of the other subcommittees and come to the full commission. So, yeah.
I'm just kind of wondering about the equity stuff on the gender issues. Because yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Sure, it needs to get into all of that. But in no other subcommittee are we trying to get to everything that we would like to make a recommendation on, that the city should move forward. And everything that Margaret's saying sort of overarches everything that we're doing. So we're not saying a separate committee but a committee out of which some recommendations can come that can start furthering the work of equity and health equity and all of that. So not the end report, but more sort of the middle. And you said you wanted to be on that committee, so I'm sure. Well, so we're still at, do we form a subcommittee or do we just, and another version is that Bernali and Francis and I keep going, doing the work and start bringing you reports. So David, if once a report comes to a commission, does that become official business of the commission? If a report is shared from a non-subcommittee?
From a non-subcommittee. I
And
would have to look into that. I don't
Yeah.
have an answer off my head.
Because that might be the easiest, that we present, and then if the whole commission adopts, then it becomes an official.
So I'm seeing Commissioner Malvito's hand up. I just don't understand. I
Sorry,
think we're
Hector.
complicating it, and we just,
It's
what we need.
only the Brown Act numbers, otherwise it's not complicated.
Yeah, and I'm like, we want to hold a list. Francis, maybe you can share some of the three things we said we wanted to do, and that might be helpful. And then 3 months later, if you want to talk about, gender-based violence, and we haven't done enough work on gender-based violence in like same-sex communities, or there's some missing, we can add more people can leave.
Yeah.
We can build on those recommendations. I think we're just looking for an official place to start doing this work where it's integrated, and we can tell service providers we're doing it for the task force, and it's not something the three of us are just going rogue and trying to.
Yeah, because we'd have too much fun. Maybe Hector can share with us what he's thinking.
No, I agree with Commissioner Ghosh. I think this is just like the first step of what this can look like. I mean, alternatively, if there is some sort of bureaucratic or commission-based, issues with how outside of subcommittee groups work together, and they can report stuff too. I think maybe something that we can start doing is that the community engagement subcommittee is meeting with this smaller group of Commissioner Chima Ghosh and Ho to have these discussions. And then have that report go through them as sort of a middleman. But again, I don't want to complicate this more. I think we have gone for way too long. I do just want to move on. If that's okay with folks, I would welcome a motion to move this forward. And then we can, we build the plane as we fly it.
Yeah, I think I already made a motion. So if I'm feeling like we're staying flexible. And if folks want to know more context, I think one of the challenges was we did not feel that this was fitting in very well within the format of the way listening sessions were being conducted. So we're actually stepping in and volunteering additional time to make up for some of the gaps that we're seeing in the community engagement process that's been proposed, and who's doing it and how they're doing it. So we might still reach out to Bright Star. We have some information about who we might talk to there. Depends on the contact. We'll coordinate with David or Shamika. But we just want some space to move forward and do this work and fill in those gaps. So I think that's all we're asking for.
Okay, Mr. White, Ms. Cole, do we have the motion?
We have a motion to create an alternative solutions to gender-based violence, which was Commissioner Ghosh gave the motion. Is that correct?
That's what
Yes.
I have.
Okay, so we would need a second.
I'll second it.
Second by Chima. Okay.
Any other
Okay.
discussion right now? Commissioner Malvito.
Sorry, my hand is not.
The only thing that I have on my mind is, you've identified some extremely vulnerable, marginalized groups that need attention. But I'm pretty concerned about some that have just as devastating circumstances around gender, and whether the subcommittee is broad enough that they're going to be able to be included.
Why don't you just communicate with the subcommittee things that you would want us to look at?
Okay, I can do that. I have the research.
Now that it's a new subcommittee, different
No.
people can be in
I was-
it. You can wanted to be in it.
Yeah, I
Or
can do.
Can be in the alternative subcommittee that was just created as well, you know. We can be doing the work in both.
Well, that's my whole thing. If we're gonna take up gender, and I'm definitely have thoroughly researched gender in a certain area, dealing with transgender individuals and the police, and it's horrifying, and they have the highest incarceration rates of anybody. What I'm trying to ensure right here is that this subcommittee is going to be able to absorb this or gender variant people. And that I don't want to see something that's just strongly binary. But I want to feel like there's only so much work you can do. You know, you have family, you have work, and this is another commitment. So I'm trying to be sensitive to that too.
Okay. Yeah, I think Commissioner Fine, sending your suggestions to the subcommittee will certainly be helpful for them. And as we have the report outs over a couple of meetings, we'll get a better idea of the scope of work and where improvements may be needed or a greater outreach may be needed. So yeah, Ms. Cole, if we can call the roll, please.
Or Commissioner Fine,
Yes.
Commissioner Jigu,
Yes.
Vice Chair Chima,
Yes.
Commissioner Blake, Commissioner Linheim,
Yes.
Commissioner Dangerfield, Commissioner Ghosh,
Yes.
Commissioner Hyde,
Yes.
Commissioner Malvito,
Yes.
Chair Mizell,
Yes.
Commissioner Opton, Commissioner Diaz,
Yes.
Commissioner Lutzker,
Yes.
Commissioner Ho.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you. And then can we do we have a clear list on membership for this subcommittee already?
No, we don't.
Okay. Interested parties, please make yourself known. Any other commissioners than the folks who introduced the item?
Who do you have, Nathan?
Like, I have you, Commissioner Ho, Commissioner Ghosh. Was Commissioner Malvito, were you interested in this as well?
5.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Does there need to be, I mean, we've been talking about maximums and quorum. Does there need to be a minimum number of commissioners on a subcommittee?
No,
Not that
I'm
I-
not aware.
No.
It's supposed to be 2 or 3 in other commissions, but I don't know what it is
Present
for us.
for a subcommittee meeting, right? Okay. I don't know. This is such a large commission. I'm very confused about numbers.
Also, David, seeing how a couple of commissioners might have to reapply, our quorum should have changed. Right?
We're tracking that.
You have
We're
not-
tracking.
You
It has,
check?
but you've not had an issue with numbers going beyond 8.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, so Ms. Wright, do you have the list? I'm just trying to make sure we know who's on the second. Yes, okay.
We have Ghosh,
Great.
Ho, and Chima.
Okay. Any other members interested at this time? Okay, seeing no hands, we will move on. Thank you, Vice Chair, Commissioner Ghosh, Commissioner Ho, for introducing that item. Again, very important work. Thank you for taking it on. And we'll move straight into our action items and a presentation from the department and Interim Chief Lewis.
Good evening, everybody. I believe that Lieutenant McGee is going to run a PowerPoint for us. Tonight, you're going to hear from various members of our department about their various areas of expertise and responsibility. And to lead off tonight, Captain Mike Durbin is going to talk about some pieces of our field training and probationary period. Captain Durbin.
Good evening. Thank you, Chief Lewis. Yeah, I am Mike Durbin. I'm the Operations Division Captain. I'm a direct report to Chief Lewis. So we do have the field training program in the Operations Division, as well as oversight over the probationary period of our newest hires. So I'm going to give it just a moment here and let Lieutenant McGee get everything up on the screen, and then I'll be working off those bullet points there. So our field training program, it's all BPD officers, regardless of their experience, they may only have a year or two on with another agency. They may have 20 years on, or they could be a new hire that we just have coming to us from an academy, but they'll all get the 18-week field training program. That field training program consists of a 4-week orientation. We expanded that the last few years from a 2-week orientation, just because the additional responsibilities. We found that it's very important to make sure they don't just get thrown into okay, now start doing the job, without making sure they have the foundation. So we did that. We found that we are having a higher success rate recently. After orientation, they'll get 3 one-month phases of training with different officers, and then there's a 2-week final in which they're on their own. The new officers receive daily written evaluations, constant supervision, and training. We always have a training officer with our newest hires. So even something as simple as a traffic post, we will put the training officer with that new hire. New officers are progressively given more responsibility and decision-making. They rely less and less on their trainers. The trainers are looking for that. They give them a little bit more responsibility. They back off a little bit more. At each phase of the training, there's a lot of collaboration between the training officers. Those training officers report to a sergeant, and there's a lieutenant who oversees the program. So they're constantly talking to make sure that they're seeing a good progression and that we don't have any regression, or sometimes there's a lack of confidence. And so we're always trying to get the officer to that next stage and get them on their own. We at this point, we have felt that we've hired the best, most ethical and hardest working person. So we're already really highly invested in them, and it behooves the city and us to make sure that they successfully pass the program. Additional training may still be needed sometimes, and we will extend an officer's training so long as they are progressing towards what is called a solo officer standard. That's a post term, which is Peace Officers Standards and Training. It's the field training program, and most of what we do works under post guidelines. And so we want to make sure that an officer is meeting the absolute minimum standards, because we do recognize that officers will continue to learn through the first. I mean, for me personally, I would say I wasn't really comfortable until 3 or 4 years into the career. The success rate over time is approximately 75 to 80%. That's pretty consistent. We see that same kind of success rate through our academy. So if we hire 8 people, I think it's very likely we'll lose one of those 8 in the academy, and we'll lose one of them in the field training program. That's very, very consistent numbers over time. At the end of the field training program, recruit officers have been training and receiving a daily evaluation and mentoring for approximately 10 months at that point. So that's a standard academy is anywhere from 22 to, I believe, 28 weeks, in that range. I believe last I heard the minimum standard in the state of California for a police academy was 22 weeks. The academies we typically send people to are about half a year, 26 weeks. So that's the academy time plus the 18-week field training program. And to become a solo officer requires successfully completing each phase of the training. A little bit about our probationary period. So all officers have a 2-year probationary period. So we've now been watching them closely in the academy, where we do communicate with the academy instructors and staff. We've watched them through the field training program very closely, and they're still on probation here for 2 years. That 2-year probationary period is on the high end to my knowledge. I think most police departments are 18 months or even 1 year. So it's something we watch closely for quite a while to make sure that we're hiring the best people and retaining the best people. During that time, new officers are assigned to a patrol team, and as their training continues as a SO officer, their performance is monitored. They will receive performance evaluations during probation. During the probationary period, it's every 6 months, they'll get a performance evaluation, as opposed to the rest of us through our careers, they're annually. If an officer does not satisfy the organization's standards, they will be released from probation. So as I said, we do lose people in the academy about 25% of the time, 25% of the time, and during the field training program, about the same percentage. But we're not hesitant to actually release somebody that we don't think is a good fit and doing the job well, even through the probationary period. And that's the last bullet point is kind of supports that statement. So regardless of staffing issues, the department is committed to releasing probationary officers who do not meet our standards or values. And Lieutenant McGee, I'm not sure if you wanted to do just move on to your piece now.
Yeah, I'll take it from here. So we at Berkeley PD support the community oversight. As many of you know, the Police Review Commission was started in 1973 and works as an independent civilian oversight agency with our department. And then even more recently, as many of you know, in 2020, the voters passed for the approval of the Police Accountability Board, which actually starts tomorrow. So that's going to be going into effect, and we're going to continue to work with the civilian oversight here in the city. We acknowledge the importance and value of community oversight as it builds trust within our community and provides legitimacy, two things that we are very much aware of and we take into account. The Chief and Command Representative regularly attends PRC, soon to be the PAB, to share information and hear community concerns. If the Chief is not there, a lieutenant or another ranking officer is there and brings those concerns back to share with the department. We collaborate on issues of community concern, policy, and police reform. And then informally, I think, which is one of the most important pieces, we continually seek feedback from the community on a daily basis. When we're interacting with the community, if we see or hear a concern, we're going to bring that back. We're going to talk about that. We're going to see if we can adjust something that we do in our common daily practice to address that concern. We're going to talk about that amongst our team with superiors, and we're going to try to come to some sort of a way to address that. And we are always accessible in the field. Obviously, people can call into us. We're checking emails on a regular basis, and our outreach efforts. Last week, we had an outreach effort along with Councilmember Taplin at a local park, and there we were just impromptu conversations arose with people who didn't even know we were going to be there, and we listened to their concerns and we explained our message. We explained what we're trying to do. So all of those contribute to the community oversight that's out there and to the police department supporting that. And then this is just a quick slide to show external commendations that come to our department via email, via written correspondence, via messages, phone calls into command staff. And you can look 2017, 18, 19, 20, consistently on the rise with more and more numbers. And then there's just kind of a word cloud here of common words and phrases that are in these correspondence that we see most frequently. And I think it's really just a kind of a testimony to who the officers are and how they're remaining professional, and mainly how they're interacting with the community on a regular basis. It's kind of a good measuring point for us. And in fact, today, I brought a accommodation to a team, to an officer that was working last night, and the accommodation came through just on our webmail. But it talked about how last night he worked with a woman that was in distress, and community members saw the interaction. And the community member that wrote this, her husband was the one who actually called the police on this individual who needed help. And she was very struck by how the officer took time and patience to work with the person in distress, but then also took the time to meet with her and explain to her what was going on. And she not only commented on the one officer who was the primary officer, but also on the other officers who were on scene as well, all of which were taking time and concern to address the person in crisis, but also address the community and articulate to the community what was happening. And now I'm going to pass it over to Sergeant Joe Ledoux to talk about General Order E13.
All right, good evening. My name is Joe Ledoux, and I'm a sergeant in professional standards, specifically in policy. So I'd like to briefly talk about General Order E13, which is our early warning system. This is one of our policies that's been in place since 2004, and it kind of falls into the bucket of wellness. This is intended to help officers or help supervisors identify officers that may be having external issues or potentially internal issues, and to get them some informal assistance or an intervention before something happens. And so that's the purpose of this policy. So specifically, it's the policy is authored so that supervisors can identify any of the outliers in various categories. And there will be these bullet points below, but it's not limited to. Some of the things that have been identified, including attendance, sustained and not sustained complaints, informal complaints, use of force, any of the resisting arrest incidents, vehicle collisions, and then conduct at work. And like I said up there, and it's bolded because it's not limited to this, but these are some of the key identifiers that we look for. So if any of these come to one of the supervisors, we try to go ahead and informally get them help or see if there's something that we can help with. And it's important to recognize now that for the supervisor, generally speaking, our span of control is like 5 to 7 from operations. So it's a manageable amount to sit there and supervise and to see if any of these are being abused or becoming problematic. So with that, as we work with the FIP, and we just recently met with them to hear some of their intents or intentions from the working group just last week or earlier this week. We're working to go ahead and revise this policy so that we ensure that it's got best practices and that we make any modifications to further our goals with meeting the FIP's recommendations. So I'll go ahead and pass it over to, I believe it's Sergeant Jamani Jones.
Hi, thank you. So I'm Sergeant Jones. I'm one of the newest members to the Internal Affairs Bureau. Our internal affairs consist of 2 sergeants who conduct the internal affairs, internal and external complaint investigations, and 1 civilian employee. We report directly to the chief, as you can see on the graphic here on the screen of the organizational chart. We report directly to the chief of police. We investigate all complaints of misconduct by police department personnel, that's sworn and non-sworn. We assist the city attorney's office in the investigation of civil claims against department and/or employees. We also act as a liaison with the city attorney's office and as well as the police review commission. From our investigations, if there's things that we see necessary, we advise the chief on the police on matters relating to discipline and issues of liability and training as they may relate to the disciplinary process. Example of that, if we see issue of complaints or a number of complaints where we think that a modification in some of the training that we have to better educate our officers in some of their practices, we will recommend that to the chief and further to some of our subject matter experts. We have constant communication with the chief of police. We have a standing meeting with the chief of police weekly to provide updates on current cases, as well as any new complaints that we have received. And ultimately, bottom line here on this slide is we hold the organization accountable to a high level of integrity and quality of service. Not only we owe that to the community that we serve, but to our department as well as to the profession. Next slide, please. So in this flow chart here is a bit of a roadmap of the complaint process. To begin, we're going to start just and focus on the middle boxes from the top down. And then after that, we'll talk a little bit about the boxes to the left and to the right of the graphic. So first off, a personnel complaint is an allegation of misconduct by a police department employee working within the police department received from any source. Employee misconduct is an act of violating departmental rules, regulations, order, policy, or procedures, or a criminal offense. As I mentioned, that complaints can come from many different sources. Complaints are received in several different ways. They're received by community members calling internal affairs directly. Sometimes we have people walk in and report directly to internal affairs and or supervisor. Complaints can also be made in writing by filling out the complaint form, which can be found on our webpage, also at the front counter here at the Public Safety Building. And complaints can come on via email as well, not only to the investigators directly to Sergeant Cummings and I, but also via webmail, which is what Lieutenant McGee mentioned with receiving commendations as well. Again, I mentioned that complaints can be received from supervisors, and those are usually routed to us via the chain of command of the subject employee. We also receive complaints filed with the Police Review Commission. The community members have an option of filing a complaint with Internal Affairs, the Police Review Commission, and or both. Well, if the complaint decides to file a complaint with the Police Review Commission and not the Internal Affairs Bureau, that automatically triggers a parallel investigation that we will conduct here in Internal Affairs. And complaints can also be initiated by a third party. Example of that is a witness that believes that they witnessed police misconduct can file a complaint, and we will investigate that to the fullest.
Sergeant Johnson, I'm gonna interrupt you just quick too. I just want to, we talked to the task force earlier about this, but just as a reminder, we now have a standing order for all officers who make contact in the field during detention. They're required to provide the person that they detain with information about how to make a commendation or complaint about that service. And that's located as a sticker on the back of business cards. And that's going to be absorbed into an official policy. But as of right now, that's the direction that all officers have.
Thank you. So going back to the flow chart, I mentioned that there's several different ways that complaints can come into Internal Affairs. So starting from the top, the formal complaint is received by Internal Affairs Bureau. Myself or Sergeant Cummings will communicate with the complainant. If the complainant chooses to pursue the complaint, we make an appointment to take a statement from the complainant. The complainant will then provide a statement to us in regards to what they witnessed and the allegations or the misconduct that they believe that they witnessed or was conducted by one of our employees. We investigate that complaint to the fullest. And once the investigation is complete, that complaint then goes to an internal board of review who recommends a disposition to the chief. I'll talk a little bit more about the board of review and their process coming up here soon. Once the board of review reviews the case and forwards that to the chief of police, the chief reviews the entire complaint and makes a disposition. The chief then sends written correspondence to the complainant themselves with the outcome of the investigation. So the complainant is made aware of the result of the final disposition of the complaint that they initiated with the police department and or police review commission that will be investigated by the police department as well. So just to talk a little bit about the bullets on the side, the bubbles on the side. There's a couple different things that can happen in the process when IAB is attempting to communicate or communicating with the complainant. So if you look at the arrows, and we'll start over to the left. So again, the complaint comes in, IAB will communicate with the complainant. Well, upon that communication, if the complainant chooses not to pursue the complaint, and it's their choice whether they choose to or not, if they choose to not continue with the complaint, the formal complaint, the chief of police will send a letter acknowledging the complaint and that they chose to withdraw the complaint, and that is written correspondence. And if we go over here to the right side, there's a few things that can happen from the top bubble when IAB goes to communicate with a complainant. So if we attempt to communicate with the complainant and we are unable to contact the complainant via phone, and it's just not a one phone call type of thing. We'll try several times, leave several messages to try to contact the complainant. And if we don't get a return phone call from the complainant from the initial outset of contact, we'll send a letter. The chief of police will send a letter requesting contact or to communicate with Internal Affairs Bureau. If we don't get a response, we'll send a second one. And then we'll send a third if we don't get a response from the second one. Those 3 letters will be sent in a matter of 1 to 2 weeks apart. So we're talking almost a month of attempted communication. If for some reason those several attempts to contact via phone and or written correspondence, the complainant still does not communicate with the Internal Affairs Bureau, we'll then send out written correspondence letting the complainant know that the complaint has been closed. Okay. Now, moving on down the center, we communicate with the complainant chooses to pursue the complaint, and now the complainant has set up an appointment with us. Well, going to the third down on the right, the complainant does not show up for our appointment that we have set up. Again, if that takes place, then we will send, the chief will send a written correspondence to the complainant requesting to reschedule the interview with Internal Affairs Bureau investigator. Again, if we still get failed correspondence from the complainant after that, and the complainant fails to show up to 2 appointments, because we'll send another request out. If the complainant doesn't show up for 2 appointments with Internal Affairs Bureau, again, we'll send written correspondence advising the complainant that the investigation has been closed. Next slide.
Maybe I'll just step in real quick here for 1 second too. Sergeant Jones, sorry to interrupt. I think what we're really trying to drive at with this is that if we've missed the mark, if a contact has not gone well, we want to afford the community an opportunity to reach out to us. We want to hear about it. And we're not going to make one phone call, and if we don't hear back, close it out and not investigate it. You know, our investigators try very hard to make sure that not only do we have contact, but people are aware of the process, and that they have communication along the way. If there's some issue why they're not coming in, or some confusion about that, we communicate quite a bit, because it's important to us to hear and understand what happened in that interaction.
Next slide, please. Going back, the complaint comes in, we make contact with the complainant, we're able to obtain the complainant statement, and now the investigation begins. First off, the investigation is a complete, fair, and objective investigation. I mentioned that we interview the complainant. Part of the investigation also is all physical evidence is preserved and analyzed. Quick example of that is camera footage from a private or commercial business that may be available for us. Also, cell phone video that may have been captured by a community member. All that's taken into account. All witnesses are contacted and interviewed, and that includes independent witnesses as well as other police employees. Part of the investigation as well is we interview all subject employees. Of course, subject employees have the right to answer to the alleged misconduct that's been reported to us, so that's also part of the investigation as well. We review all body-worn camera video and audio evidence. Audio evidence could be an example of a radio transmission that was on the police radio, as well as dispatch recordings. And so once all the evidence is obtained and interviews are conducted, we prepare a written report, and that complete case goes to the board review for the purpose of reviewing and making findings on the complaint matter. The board review consists of a captain appointed by the chief of police, an on-duty patrol sergeant, a representative from the city manager's office, and 2 representatives from the subject employees union, whether that be the BPA or the SEIU Local 1021. Once the board reviews the whole case, they will make a recommendation to the chief of police as far as the disposition. And from there, the ultimate decision lies with the chief. Once the chief makes the decision of the final disposition of the case, the subject employee is notified of the chief's decision, and as well, the complainant is notified of the chief's decision as well. We go to Sergeant Cummings.
Yes, good evening. I'm Sergeant Cummings of the Internal Affairs Bureau. Once the process has been followed and an investigation has been completed and the chief has rendered a decision, there are several levels of discipline that an officer can potentially face. All of these disciplines require a sustained complaint with the exception of one, which is a supervisor referral. A supervisor referral is essentially a supervisor's counseling, and that does not require a formal investigation, nor does it require a sustained complaint. So for instance, if a community member calls in and they speak to a supervisor, they can say, hey, I just had an interaction with your officer. I didn't like his behavior. Can you please talk to him? They can also call a lieutenant and or the Internal Affairs Bureau, and we can refer it to the supervisor. In the event the complaint was sustained and the chief has rendered a decision, the other levels of discipline that exist are a written advice, which is a letter that goes in the officer's file. It advises them of the violation and how to proceed moving forward and what the expectations are of them. A written reprimand is very similar to a written advice. However, the language is a little more harsh, and it basically says another violation of similar statute would result in probably suspension and or worse. The next level is a suspension. Suspensions can happen from 1 day or all the way up to 30 days. An officer cannot be suspended for more than 30 days in a calendar year per the MOU. However, if it reaches the level where an officer needs to be suspended beyond 30 days, then you're probably looking at termination. And then lastly, termination occurs for the most egregious offenses. Next slide, please. So it's important to know that the chief of police determines the level of discipline, and discipline is progressive and it's based on set precedent, which means that if an officer commits a low-level violation, more than likely you're going to start at the written advice. If they commit that same violation again, you move up to the written reprimand. Another violation will result in suspension. And so you kind of climb the ladder of progressiveness as the suspensions occur. Or excuse me, as the violations occur. However, if it's a serious enough offense, you can actually start at a suspension level and not necessarily start at the written advice. It's going to be based on set precedents, which is what did Officer A receive for the same violation? And in most cases, if it's a discourtesy, you'll start at the written advice. If it's something more severe or more serious, you can start at suspension and or termination for anything involving dishonesty, theft, and crimes or anything like that. Government Code 3300 through 3311 is used as a foundation for the complaint investigation process, as well as punitive action and its subsequent proceedings. So if an officer receives a notification of a suspension, they have the right to appeal it and go to a Skelly hearing before they go to a city manager's appeal, as well as arbitration. Next slide, please. So Blue Team is currently a system that the department has employed to track use of force. It's how supervisors write reports. Blue Team is the software that's currently being used to document and track use of force. When a reportable use of force occurs, the supervisor must complete a use of force reporting as dictated by policy 300. The use of force reports contain detailed information regarding incidents such as the type of contact, the reason for the contact, date, time, location, involved employees, witness employees, involved community members, witness community members, the types of force, including the levels, the reason the force was used, the resistance type by the involved party, whether or not CIT or any de-escalation techniques were used, what type of equipment was used, wraps, spit hoods, handcuffs, etc. The disposition of the officer, whether or not they sustained any injuries, as well as the disposition of the subjects, whether they sustained injuries, were they arrested, were they hospitalized, and so forth. Next slide, please. My apologies. Before moving on to IA Pro, Blue Team actually communicates with IA Pro. Once a Blue Team report is completed by a supervisor, it's forwarded via the chain of command. A lieutenant receives it, they review it. The lieutenant reviews it, they forward it to a captain for another review. In some cases, depending on the severity of it, the captain then forwards it to the chief of police if it rises to a level that may fall within the scope of SB 1421. Generally, the captain will notate whether or not they believe the use of force appears to be within policy based on all of the evidence presented and within the report. And once it's reviewed by a captain and or chief and they've made their notation, the Blue Team reports are then forwarded to the Internal Affairs Bureau for one last brief review. Once we review it, then we will import that information into the IA Pro for record keeping purposes. IA Pro is currently the software that we're using to track informal inquiries, internal complaints, external complaints, use of force, and generate statistical reports. Informal inquiries are basically inquiries into an employee's conduct where the complaining party specifically requests only that advice or that the matter be resolved without a personnel complaint investigation. And it can be handled by internal affairs, by a lieutenant and or a supervisor, kind of hearkening back to the supervisor referral that we spoke about earlier. Internal complaints are any complaints generated from another member of the Berkeley Police Department. External complaints are all others that are generated outside of the department, which include the Police Review Commission or any other city bureau. And then, of course, we track use of forces and we can generate statistical point reports at the end of the year. Next slide. Chief, you want me to take this one?
No, I'm happy to talk about this one too. So what we wanted to do is provide some information that sort of took a look over a 5-year period and covered the number of calls for service we got. Admittedly, not every call for service requires us to have a human interaction with an individual. Sometimes it's a phone report or some other incident that we're able to close out or transfer that call. But you can see the sheer magnitude of the number of calls for service we had over that 5-year period. And then also see the number of uses of forces that were generated as a result of those contacts, the number of IA complaints and so forth. Now, I feel like it was really important to provide this information to give some context to just the quality of the service and work and performance that our officers are employing. Now, next slide, please. So what I really wanted to make sure we covered tonight was I wanted to provide some background so you had an understanding of all the formal and informal ways that we monitor and track the work that our officers are doing. that we seek opportunities to mentor and provide strong foundations, the ways in which if someone is not on track or is not reflective in our values, that we correct, the ways that we reach out to the community and engage with the community and listen to our community about the work we do. So that, like I said, we know whether we're on track, we know if we need to redirect, we know whether our training as a whole or our training individually needs to be improved or adapted to reflect the needs of our community. And really, it's an opportunity for us to continue to grow and develop. And I think as one of the questions I often get asked is why we don't do a better job of sort of talking about the positives, talking about the good work that we do, talking about the information that's on that previous slide. And I think we're just so used to doing our job and doing our work and hoping that our work speaks for itself. But I think it is important in light of the work that's being done by this task force and the level of interest in the efforts that we're doing, and really the exploration into sort of analyzing the things that we do and the ways we do it, and whether that work would be better served with another community agency or just not being done at all. I did want to share very specifically some of the things that we have recently progressed on or moved towards or engaged in, as I think they're really relevant to understanding our interest in being involved in the reimagining process, our interest in really hearing our community and hearing the direction that we want to go. And we very much acknowledge, I know there's some questions about this sometimes, but we understand and acknowledge that there are disparities in our traffic stop data. We understand that those disparities exist. We understand the impact that traffic stops and detentions and yield rates have had very specifically, historically, on communities of color. And we're interested in understanding not only why, but what we can do to better address those disparities, to improve the method and the manner in which we do our work in an attempt to ensure that our policing is equitable, that our community can trust and have faith that when we are making contact with someone, we're doing it for an investigative or traffic safety purpose. In May of this year, I provided very specific direction to the department, and that direction was that we were going to focus our enforcement on those traffic violations that had a causal connection to the serious collisions and fatalities that we were experiencing. I also provided the department very clear direction that we expect that the stops that they make have an investigative basis, that we're focused on ensuring that the information that we receive from our community is what drives us in our investigative stops. The information that we receive from our detectives who are engaged in jurisdictional collaboration, who are reviewing cases, that's the information that's driving our work and what we're doing. So our traffic enforcement is going to be focused throughout the city. We're not going to highlight specific areas, which we know historically has had the impact of negatively impacting small parts of our community. So officers are going to engage in this enforcement within their beats, and they're going to engage and focus on those things that are most connected to serious collisions. And now, as we shared a couple of meetings ago too, we talked a little bit about the FIP recommendations, and we are very committed and engaged in that work. And one of the reasons why I wanted Sergeant Ledoux to come and speak tonight about the early intervention system is not just because it's one of the important FIP recommendations, but it is also a space where we are having true and real collaboration with the FIP task force, and having a session where we could really hear what that recommendation intended. We know there was a lot of work that task force got involved in. We know there's a lot of work both at the subcommittee and committee level that this task force is involved in, and we want to have a true and real understanding. And that's another reason why you see so many of us at these meetings, and you see Lieutenant McGee at all of these meetings, is that we really want to understand both the thought process and just make sure that we are providing information that can help move this process forward. Now, another piece of the FIP recommendations was that we move towards evidence-based policing, that we really are sure that the data is what drives our work, and that we can be proactive, but we can be focused in a proactive way that's based on data. We have sought for and received approval for a strategic and a forensic analyst. Those analysts are going to be non-sworn positions, and that's going to really enable us to understand what the data means. We're going to have a year's worth of REPA data soon about our stops. We're going to continue to dive into our calls for service data. And those analysts will not only be able to provide the big picture, but also the focused enforcement pieces, so that we know that if someone is in crisis or is rising up to a level of criminal behavior, that we'll be able to have a tool to provide information when we look at violence prevention strategies, that we can really feed that process and look at harm reduction and make sure that we're intervening in the same way we want to intervene with our employees before something becomes an issue. We want to be a positive influence in our community to have interventions in that manner also. Another really big piece I want to talk about is officer wellness and where we are with that. And when I think about wellness, I think about two things. I think about community wellness and I think about officer wellness. And for me, community wellness means that the community both has their public safety needs met, but they also feel that we are equitable in our policing and they feel safe with the police in their community. And then I think about officer wellness, and that's not just the equipment pieces that make us safe, our less lethal, our safety, our bulletproof vests, the armor that we have, the tools that we have, the training that we have about those things. But it's also our mental wellness. It's the understanding that we need some of that space, that downtime between calls to reset. We have a stressful, traumatic profession, and we are exposed to trauma regularly. And we need to make sure that our officers are at their very best, and that have the opportunity and the resources, both through psychological services and wellness services, meditation services to be wellness. And then I see those two pieces of wellness really coming together in our community engagement. So the more that we engage with our community and hear from our community and really understand our community about what drives their feeling of safety, and the more we can share about the work we're doing and drive that safety, the more in community engagement and enhanced community engagement we have, the better wellness we have for our entire community, not just for our department, but for all those affected in our community. And we really have been moving to more enhanced community engagement. And I will be the first one to say that, and I've mentioned this many times over our last presentations, that we are not strong in our area of having good collaboration and connections to some community-based organizations or highly affected communities that have fears around us, or don't understand the work we do, or are concerned that we won't serve them to our fullest ability. And so we've really tried to expand. We had a recent event with Councilmember Taplin. We intend to try and have an event with every single council person in their district. I would really also offer that if you have a community-based organization as a member of this task force that you think would like to hear from us or collaborate with us, we want to be a partner to that. And really, we want to have the space and time and staffing levels to be deeply engaged with our community. And then finally, a piece that we really are grateful to have a leadership role in is the collaborative approach to really address the council referral on hate crime, both reporting and reduction. And that's going to be an effort by not only committees in the city, but several city departments. And I'm actually very excited that that's going to be an opportunity for us to set a model for the nation, where we can be a leader in not only understanding and tracking and providing ease for reporting for hate crimes, but also for making a real impact on that. So I really wanted to have this quick opportunity to just really share some of the places we're going, and just know that we're committed to continue to move forward. Go ahead, grab that last slide for me, Lieutenant McGee. So I know that there was a list of questions that recently were provided, and we want to make sure we hit those things and really gather the information. And we will be back July 8th. We remain committed to trying to get as many questions as we can answered. I also wanted to continue to offer, if anyone has not had a ride along or a sit along, that's something we encourage. And if there are specific subject matter experts or pieces of this work that someone wants more information in, I know someone mentioned earlier the domestic violence advocate and detectives that we have in our department. We want to make those connections so you can hear from those experts. And that's just simply a matter of us hearing that it's an issue or an item that you want to know more about, and us finding the right person to connect you with. And so thank you very much for your time tonight. I know we ran a little bit over 20 minutes, but it was really important information for us to share.
Thank you, Commissioner Fine.
I just wanted to say that I did the sit along this week, and it was amazing. And the light was just, it was just It really gave me a different perspective, and I'm really grateful for that opportunity. I hope other people get to do it and that we get to have another conversation about dispatch.
Great, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. And that's our goal. Our goal along this whole process has been to really provide you with the foundation and the information that can really support and drive the recommendations that you guys make.
Commissioner Hyde.
Great, thank you, Chair, and thanks a lot to the whole BPD. There was a lot of content in this presentation, and I know you guys were cognizant. I could tell you guys were cognizant of moving it through and getting us all the stuff we need, and we know that the questions really only just arrived to you, so we'll look forward to written answers, narrative style answers to some of that stuff too. As usual, I have a handful of questions, and I feel like they can probably be answered pretty quickly. Shall I just fire them off? We'll get an answer, and then I'll move to the next.
Yeah, if you want to fire them off, if there's ones we can quickly answer, we will. Otherwise, we'll just add them into our list of questions.
Sounds good. Most of these, Chief, will be relevant for you and probably quick answers. The training overall that BPD officers get, both in the academy and then while they're on the force during the probationary period, all of that training, would you categorize that in the warrior mentality as a high level descriptor of it, or in protector mentality? And frankly, is that divergence a conversation within the trainings that your officers receive?
Yeah, we actually have a great document that I'm going to make sure it gets forwarded to the task force, which covers those trainings, some of those trainings that we're really proud of, that we started back in 2014, that cover topics about implicit bias, procedural justice, principled policing, tactical de-escalation, all of those pieces that really have a whole lot to do with recognizing the needs on a scene, managing it, trying to employ techniques that ensure active listening and understanding, that provide neutrality and transparency, that are very much about being a guardian, supporting our community, and not sort of the traditional warrior mindset.
Great. I think we'd all like to read more about that and experience more about that. Thank you. The suspensions that may happen through IA within BPD, does the labor contract stipulate whether those happen with pay or without pay, or is that at your discretion?
So there's a variance, and there's some discretion around it, and allowances for employees sometimes to use their vacation or other time that they've accrued, as opposed to being without pay. Of course, that's always a piece of the process, and we understand, all of the pieces that come into discipline and ensuring that we provide fairness and equity with what's happening with other employees.
Got it. Has BPD ever hired officers that have been let go from other departments, either in the state or in the country, for E13 type reasons?
Well, E13 is really about correcting, beginning behavior. And so that includes things like abusive sick leave, like too many sick days off. So I would say absolutely, we've hired somebody from another agency that may have had too many sick sick days, something like that. What we do when we hire someone, a lateral hire, right, is we review their background material and talk to the agencies they come from and learn about what the issues were in their file, learn about whether they have active complaints in effect and things like that. But the E13 is very much about catching things early. So, and sometimes a person is not a good fit for an agency, the culture of an agency. And in fact, we have hired people in the past that have been great fits for our department that maybe didn't make it through a bigger department for whatever reason, where sort of it was more militaristic than we are and things like that. So I would say the answer is yes to that, but with that caveat that it's we don't ever bring someone on without seriously considering whether the issues they had in their background may repeat with us.
Great, great. I'm going to ask that a slightly different way, you know, based on your helpful answer. Has BPD hired officers that were let go for disciplinary reasons?
Yeah, and again, it's hard for me to say yes or no as a solid because, you know, we've hired a lot of people laterally over the years.
Right.
But I would say that, and things can be as simple as a discourtesy, as a sustained complaint, to as serious as, you know, discrimination and things like that. We certainly, and this was on one of the slides we talked about earlier, we are not going to retain someone who is an issue or bring someone on who's an issue just to resolve a staffing issue, if that makes sense. So if someone had concerning behavior in their past at another agency, we would not take that risk on.
Great. For CIT and de-escalation training, is that something that every sworn officer gets and perhaps every non-sworn officer gets?
So many of our non-sworn officers get some of that training, including our dispatchers. And you know, there's been a little bit of a misperception about our CIT trained officers because every single one of our officers has CIT training. It goes anywhere from 4 to 8 hours in the academy to an 8-hour class to a 32 to 40-hour class. And what we recently just started is to get people back cycled through the class that Oakland Police Department holds. It's a 36-hour, I believe, CIT training class. That stopped for a little while, and that was one of our main sources of taking that class. So yes.
Great, glad to hear you have dogs, if indeed that was you. We like dogs. So are officers required to demonstrate that they have made use of the CIT training or employed some of the de-escalation techniques in a more, well, in any setting, any sort of interaction with the public? Are they required to use those tactics before moving on to de-escalation tactics?
Yeah, I think what I'll do is also send you guys the blank daily training evaluation that any new hire goes through as part of the FTO program that Captain Durbin talked about. But your ability to engage and process scenes in a way that reflects de-escalation and those concepts is absolutely a part of the evaluation process. And so someone who was not competent in de-escalation and good communication and professionalism would not make it out of that space.
Got it. Okay, that would be helpful to see. Thanks. I think last two questions. How many E13s, E13 situations are generally in process? However you want to categorize that, by the year or by the quarter. You know, is it a common scenario that we're working through multiple E13s, or is it fairly uncommon?
So, you know, one of the really important things about E13 is that it's an informal policy. It's meant to very much be counseling, mentoring, providing redirection to folks. And that's sometimes handled on a very, very simple basis where, you know, someone maybe calls in sick more than once in a month, and that's just a little questioning, and it's just a conversation with the sergeant. That would technically be under E13. And that supervisor would document that in their notes, their personal notes for that employee, but wouldn't necessarily rise to an official E13 case. And the whole goal of that is to provide a safe place for officers to understand that if they're off track, they're going to get correction. And so I would say on a daily basis, you know, folks are getting good supervision from their sergeants and their lieutenants. You know, one of the complaints I've had around our expanded use of force documentation is that it takes supervisors off the street. And we really find that the best place for our supervisors is engaged in working with officers, because that's where you identify when issues exist. I will say that part of our work with the FIP task force was a request on their part to be a little bit formalized with the early warning system. That's something we're exploring, so that there was more documentation created and generated that at least I would be given on a regular basis about officers, so that things didn't slip through the cracks, so that we had more knowledge of what was going on.
It does make great sense that it would be more trackable. Yeah, and monitorable, I suppose, just to see trends. And finally, Delighted to hear that you guys really take seriously the issues in the stop data that have been pointed out. How often and to which city body is reporting going to be done on that? Is it to city council? Is it to the city manager? And I would worry if it's as infrequently as every 6 months. Can it be reported on at least every quarter so that we can really see trend lines, hopefully moving in the right direction, and know that it's being taken seriously?
I apologize. I missed the very first part of what you were saying about how often we're reporting on what.
The stop data
Gotcha.
and the bias trends in the stop data.
Right. Yeah. So one of the things I'm really excited about the analyst proposal and the moving forward with the analysts is really kind of diving into that data and getting a better understanding. One of the things that we're also very happy about the REPA data is it's providing us a lot more information that we got than we had under our old system. So we're going to know more about what happened on the stop and have more information about our yield rates as a result. So the goal would be that our yield rates are very high when we make a stop, that we're stopping the right people that are engaged in criminal behavior and being able to really understand that. Now, our REPA data is regularly posted on the open data portal. My goal is that we will have a dashboard for the community that really sort of collates that information and provides geographical information and things like that. That's where we're headed, and where I'm hoping that we're headed is that the community really have an understanding and be able to work with our data, not just have access to raw data, but be able to see sort of an understanding through our analyst work about how we see the data and how it's driving our work. And obviously still providing the raw data so that outside analysts can take a look at it and draw conclusions and ask questions and challenge us on information in there as well.
Great, but what you've mentioned that ultimately the buck stops with you in terms of data. And are you reporting back into the mayor, the city manager, the city council on any regular time schedule on stop data?
Right. So we do a crime report twice a year to city council and the mayor. I report regularly and meet regularly with the city manager and talk about trends, both crime trends, issues that are arising and things like that. But the official reporting process would be twice a year. But again, that data is going to exist and be on our open data portal regularly.
It would be a delight if if reporting were happening to city officials more often than every 6 months. But appreciate all the detail and all that. Thanks for the time. On to the next questioner. Thanks a lot, Chief.
Commissioner Harker.
Thank you. As somebody who spends a lot of time on the ground and dealing with impacted and vulnerable community members, the number of filed and sustained reports just seems low to me. And I think we generally know why. We know that reporting is always much lower than incidents, whether it be police brutality or sexual assault. Reporting is always going to slightly or significantly undermeasure the prevalence of something. And so I was wondering if you have thoughts on how we can encourage people to report, or if you have thoughts on why people may not feel comfortable reporting.
That's a great question. And, I talked about this a little bit earlier. One of the things we've moved to is not only just on detentions, but all people we engage with. We want officers to provide their business card with information on the back that has not only a quick code for them to scan, but also website addresses that lead them back to ways to make complaints, both to PRC / soon to be tomorrow, the PAB, but also to our internal affairs, and also how to make commendations when they have service that they like. So that's one way that just every time we're encountering someone in that manner, we're trying to reach out and provide them direct information. That information is available on our website. And I will share that we do, like I said, we do want to hear from the community if we're not hitting the mark. And if you'll look at our statistics, people are reporting to us at the same rate or more often than they're reporting to the PRC. So we understand that there may be people that aren't for whatever reason are afraid to contact us. And we talked about informal or anonymous reporting being an available source. But I think as we start to build stronger connections with the Police Accountability Board and they really implement and move forward, I think they're going to probably get a lot of calls and cases. And a chair myself can probably talk even more about that in greater detail than I can, about their outreach efforts and things like that. But we're always looking for ways to hear and learn. That's how we get better, is to hear what the community thinks and how they feel about our service.
Yeah, what I can say is on the PRC, we had a outreach subcommittee, which over these last couple of months prioritized, getting an idea of where the community, just knows about the PRC, how the complaint process functions. We were able to get that survey out. Again, non-scientific, but just giving us an idea of where folks are sitting. And we got, I think, hundreds of responses. And I can share it publicly. It's one of the main reasons people wouldn't report is A, they didn't know the PRC existed, or B, they didn't think anything would come out of it. And I should say that the largest answer was they didn't have a complaint, but this was an open question about if you had the complaint, yes or no, and then if you did, why didn't you report it? And those were the two of the biggest responses. So with the PIB on my side, that is something I hope we will continue to work on. And I'll advocate that we continue to work on, so folks are aware that these bodies exist and they can reach out. Yeah, Commissioner Harger, anything else?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Commissioner Ghosh.
Hi. I don't know if you're going to be coming back to give more presentations, but I had a general comment that I've been trying to figure out how to convey in a way that feels helpful, which is that the slides that you all present are very, the graphic quality of them is very poor. And I encourage you to work on that, on those slides and that presentation. I think there are multiple things. The background is extremely distracting. The transitions are distracting. My most, the most critical thing for me, why I felt the need to say something today, is that the contrast between the letters and the background is very low, which means that it becomes less accessible to people with low vision. So from an accessibility perspective, if you just look at it from that basic perspective, they're failing. And these are the presentations that are being posted to the website. If people are trying to print them, when you print them, they're even harder. Even what was printed, like light blue on white, it's just not readable. So you're conveying really, I think, important information. It seems like these are standard presentations that you might present repeatedly. So I would really encourage you to use some kind of online or something simple online where you can upload the presentation and check the colors and make sure you have the right contrast, and keep it like simple and keep the font sizes big so it's easy to take in that information. I had a really hard time today sort of focusing on the reading part of it. And I think from accessibility perspective, it's really critical that you do that. It's urgent enough. It's not just an aesthetic thing or a subjective thing.
That's great feedback. And what we'll do is make sure that we have a white background version of every one of our presentations posted on the website. I will share that every single presentation we provided to this task force was created specifically for this task force. So there has been a monumental effort on our part to provide you the best information we can, and really build things that provide you a foundation and leave you with a document you can refer to as you continue on in your work, but also talk to you about all those other details that we didn't want to overburden the presentation with. So I do appreciate your feedback, and you make a great point about accessibility, and certainly we'll keep that in mind for further presentations.
And I know, we're talking about like police, all of that is important, but I think having the information accessible to all kinds of people is also critical. On the content, I guess I wanted to say that I did a sit-in yesterday at the Dispatch Center, and I'm still sort of processing everything I learned. And I'm hoping that as a commission, we find some way where those of us who are doing this can report back on what that was. I'll say that there were definitely things that I heard that caused me concern And there were other, and there's a lot of things I learned, right? And of the things that caused me concern, sort of going back to the sort of investigation, complaints, all of that, like trainings, everything that we've heard so far. And I'm wondering, how do you retrain somebody who's been doing this very complex thing, especially with dispatch? How do you retrain them to do things differently? Like even in the way the data was being entered, I saw, again, the word accident being used, right? I felt like there was still a lack of understanding of, say, traffic stops. And I just saw some decisions being made, even within like the 1 hour that I was sitting in the police desk, that I was like, well, as a community, we're talking about all of these things. The PRC is talking about all of these things. I don't know how, and you can get trained and trained again and trained again, but if it's the wrong kind of training, or the training's not evolving, or it takes time for people's behavior to change, how do you sort of engage that in the complaint process? And sort of back to Nathan's point, I think many of us don't know that we can complain, or how to complain, or who you call to complain. I think I've mentioned before, I've had like good experiences with police, and I had a really bad one where there was a police van that was blocking a bus lane while arresting somebody who was unhoused, and clearly there were like 4 or 5 officers there, and that person was clearly just somebody with a mental health issue. And I get that the job that you're doing is really important, but at the same time, there's a lack of awareness of how you're affecting the people around you. Like when you block the bus lane, there's a bus coming. If there's somebody in a wheelchair, they're going to miss that bus. And we know our public transit system needs a lot of work. But those are the kind of things I think that stick with me. And when I try to engage with somebody, they're like very aggressive about telling me to stay away. And I get that. You're doing a job, you're focused on that, you're concerned about everybody's safety, but like, what would I do in that kind of situation? Why is the police car blocking a bus lane for that long? How would you resolve that in a way that it doesn't happen again? Who do I talk to? Right. And I think even just being on the Transportation Commission, there are so many things that I don't know about how police sort of do that work, even though I've been doing this work for so long, because historically felt like there's been very little communication, and now we're increasing that communication, but there's still, a lot, I think we all have to learn about how this work happens. So I appreciate the presentation, and I think it still leaves me with questions about the effectiveness. And I appreciate how seriously you all take it. I learned a lot about how much dispatch is trained as well. And I can see that things are being taken seriously, but I think the cultural shift is still giving me some anxiety about whether these things are actually, maybe it's doing the job of taking care of the worst pieces of it, but not necessarily delivering on being effective in the more subtle and nuanced ways that we expect. So the worst behaviors are taken care of, but the day-to-day cultural behaviors are still giving me some concern. So.
Thank you. Let's go. Commissioner Lindheim.
Good evening, Chief. I have a series of questions. If we could go to the over the past 5 years slide, I'm having a hard time with that slide.
I had concerns about that slide as well.
So it says there are 359 uses of force. What does that refer to? Is that how many complaints there were for uses of force, or the total numbers of uses of force? What does that slide say?
So that reflects the number of documented uses of force that our officers were engaged in. Now, one of the things that happened in February of this year was that we expanded the number of categories or the types of categories that we captured in our force data. So you will see next year our uses of force will overall go up. But with that covered, and I'll have Sergeant Cummings and or Sergeant Jones talk about the specific levels, but if they want to add some more to what I'm saying. But those were documented uses of force situations that occurred under our old reporting system. And so in our old system, it didn't capture if someone had momentary pain as they were placed into handcuffs. That wasn't captured. Now, if someone has even beyond anything more than momentary discomfort as a result of our interaction with them, then it's documented as a use of force. Prior to this, if someone had a gun pointed at them and directed to do something, it was not captured as a use of force. That is now captured as a use of force. So there's some changes in our use of force, but the 359 uses of force are the documented use of force incidences that occurred under our old use of force policy. And what? Go ahead.
And how are they documented?
In the blue team reporting system that Sergeant Cummings described.
Okay. Okay. So
the other thing I can provide, we'll add it to the list of things that we provide to the task force, is we can provide you with a sample form of what the blue team reporting form looks like, all the different categories that are captured in that. We're happy to provide that.
And has there been any, this is for 5-year data, is there a trend in that data at all, or is it sort of roughly 70 per year no matter what?
Some of the things you'll see that may drive additional is, like in 2014, that was a very heavily laden demonstration a time period. And so when you have incidents like that, you sometimes see an increase in the number of uses of force. But other than that, other than other outliers of that kind, that they'll typically fall around the same. But certainly if there's a desire, we can provide that per year for each of those years.
Okay, so just continuing here on this slide. So the total number of complaints is the 133 plus 97, is that correct?
No, that's not correct, because every time a PRC complaint is generated, we automatically generate our complaint. So what you see is that 133 complaints were investigated by our internal affairs, and 97 complaints were investigated during that same time period by the PRC. Now, sometimes a person will make a complaint in both places, but certainly there's never a PRC complaint that doesn't have a corresponding internal affairs complaint.
So basically then there were only 36 complaints to IA that didn't go first to PRC over 5 years.
No, that's not correct. We often will get complaints at the same time or in both places. And 37 or 36 complaints were made to us and not to PRC.
Okay, and it says that 5 were sustained by PRC. So when the PRC comes up with one conclusion and IA comes up with a different conclusion, what's the procedure for resolving that?
So first of all, just to be clear, Internal Affairs does not come up with a disposition. They provide the investigation. There's also a board of review that looks at the investigation and comes up with a recommendation. The decision for discipline lies with the chief of police. Under the old system, the PRC disposition and the police department's disposition sat separately from each other. Now under the current PAB system, and we can provide, if there's interest in that, we're still working through the way that flow chart works, but there's collaboration and discussion between the PAB's decision and the police department's decision. And then ultimately the city manager can weigh in or will be asked to weigh in about the outcome of that disposition if there's disagreement in the outcome of the complaint.
Yeah, Commissioner Lindheim, something to bear in mind on that is that the new Police Accountability Board is drastically different than the old Police Review Commission regime. So I don't know, starting July 1st, we're going to have the Police Accountability be in effect. And so I don't know how much to extrapolate from the past going forward, given the structural changes that are going to occur.
Okay, so essentially, it seems from the chart that almost no complaints get sustained. Is that a fair reading of this?
You can look at it and look at both the PRC and the police department's ultimate decision on complaints and see the number that were sustained out of the total number received. So yes, relatively few are sustained.
Okay, so moving beyond this chart, then it must be that complaints and discipline don't have much to do with each other. There must be much more, I assume, there must be much more discipline within the department that is not based on complaints.
Well, every discipline that's an officer is subjected to is pursuant to a complaint, whether it be an external complaint made by a member of the community or an internal complaint generated by a supervisor or other police employee against another police employee. Like, for example, if a supervisor sees a problematic behavior, they can generate a complaint against that person for violation of policy or rules.
Okay, so I'm still focusing on this chart. So to what extent does the department ever discipline members of the department besides the complaints that are reflected on this chart?
We will only discipline as a result of an external or internal complaint. So we do not discipline someone unless they are afforded the rights under the Police Officer Bill of Rights through the internal affairs process.
So
that's both by the Bill of Rights and also by a memorandum, the contract basically with the police department.
So it would seem logical, just looking at this and based on what you said, that you really don't ever have any skellies.
No, we do have Skelly hearings. We have Skelly hearings when a discipline is decided and an officer feels they want to pursue an appeal, right?
Okay, so I'm still then, where are the complaints? I'm sorry, where is the discipline reflected and how many of those incidents might occur in a year such that an officer might push back and say, look, I disagree. And then after the process and the chief ultimately disciplines, they then ask for a Skelly hearing. How often does that occur?
Are you asking how often in the disciplinary process an officer either accepts their discipline or pursues it to Skelly?
Well, I don't know if the number of discipline meted out is public information. I don't know if that's available or not. If it were, I'd like to have some access to it. If it's not, it's not. But what I'm really asking is, it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of discipline going on in this department. And that may be because it's a wonderful department, but I'm not getting a sense that there's a whole lot of discipline. And if there's not a lot of discipline, there wouldn't be a lot of Skellies. But if there in fact are a number of Skelly hearings, then it's not clear to me how often that's taking place.
Okay, I mean, we can look at the data and see if it's extractable from our prior years of service, or years of information. Sometimes officers seek an appeal process and seek a Skelly. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they are happy to receive the letter and move forward. And sometimes they want to talk about it some more, or they want to have a discussion about the level of discipline that's applied. But yeah, that's typically protected information, absent it being a SB 1421 or AB 748 type case. Officers' personnel records are protected information. They have a right to their privacy around that. It's an internal process.
Right. No, I'm not interested in individual officers. I'm just interested within the department. So let me just ask the final question then. Final question on this subject. So does that mean you almost never have arbitration proceedings?
It depends on the case. I don't have statistics in front of me. I can look and see if we have that information. I do know of cases that have moved towards arbitration. I've only been chief for since March and don't have access to those files. I can ask about whether they know. But again, unless it falls under SB 1421 or AB 748, we won't be able to share that information.
And Dan, I would share anecdotally, in the past 2+ years I've been with the city, I've done 2 skellies for the department, and none have gone to arbitration.
Okay, well, that's fascinating. It's also remarkable by comparison to the neighboring department, where skellies are a major activity and arbitrations are a serious issue, particularly in overcoming or overturning discipline that was meted out by the chief. So I have one last comment. And again, it has to do with, I guess, comparison with Oakland. You mentioned in the many prior presentations ago, the one specifically on training, and also, again here, the mention of where officers get trained. And I think in the prior presentation that mentioned this, that you mentioned that a number of officers in Berkeley get trained by the county. Is that correct?
It depends on what you're talking about getting trained in. So typically, county training.
I mean, basic officer training.
Academy training.
Academy.
Okay. So Alameda County Sheriff's Office is one of the agencies that we use. We also use Sacramento Police Department. We use the Napa Valley training facility. We use a facility, it's Evergreen College down in San Jose. So we do use other agencies. Every agency that provides that training, that is a post-certified training academy. But yes, we do occasionally use the county for training.
I just wanted to point out, and you can do with this as you may, Oakland does not believe, or did not believe, it may have changed in recent years, did not believe that county training was acceptable for Oakland officers, that it believed that academy training in the county was, let's just say, of a different philosophy as to policing, and was not consistent with the way the city of Oakland wanted its police officers trained. And you might just be mindful of that. Oakland did have a special training or retraining for officers who were trained by the county, because it felt that that training was not acceptable for Oakland officers. You might want to look into that at some point, but that's a separate issue. One final issue, Captain Durbin mentioned a success rate of 75 to 80%. There was, in the recent budget process that Oakland was going through, Oakland was talking about a success rate somewhere closer to 50%. That wasn't the experience that I had 10 years ago. It was much closer to the 75 to 80%. But Oakland was talking about a fairly substantial number of people not succeeding out of the academy. And I was just wondering if there was something special in Berkeley that had this consistency of 75 to 80% success rate. And possibly other departments are failing people at an excessive rate, or possibly not. I don't really know what leads to that 75 to 80%. So if
I can share that if we have had issues with academies, we no longer use those academies. And I can share that we've had several officers who have come through the Alameda County Sheriff's Academy that are excellent officers in our agency. And we are very focused on sending officers to good agencies or good academies, to ensuring that their FTO experience challenges them, and that we ensure that they live up to the standards and expectations of working in the city of Berkeley. And we continue to do that through the probationary period and through their career. So we're not interested in sending someone to an academy that they're going to come here and not fit within the expectations of our city. We talked very much about the hiring process, the recruitment process, the hiring process, the academy process, the FTO process, the probationary process. All of those things are critical to us and making sure we have the best people here. And not only do we want the best people here, we want to then retain them. So that's the focus of our work, and it will always be that.
Well, I'm sure that good people can overcome bad teachers. I'm sure it certainly happens with my students. Some of them probably do quite well, no matter how bad I might be as a professor. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Optum.
So I'd like to first follow up on the comments by Commissioner Lindheim. In view of the fact that the Department of Justice found it necessary to investigate Santa Rita Jail's mistreatment of its inmates under the supervision of the county sheriff, and of the Department of Justice investigation that found that Santa Rita is a very terrible place. It would surprise me that Berkeley would choose to send its recruits to police academies run by that same sheriff. Now, I want to comment on dispatch. About a week ago, I did a sit-in with dispatch for 3 hours, and I was tremendously impressed by the technical equipment they have to do their job, and by the efficiency with which they appear to be doing their job, and very impressed by the activity of that very active department. I'd urge my fellow commissioners to do a sit-in with dispatch as well as a ride-along to get between those two experiences the best understanding of how the department works. One of the things that I noticed after the sit-along at dispatch for 3 hours is that I do not recall there having been a single traffic stop reported. And so I wonder if that's because officers make traffic stops but don't report them, or if I was sitting in the middle of the afternoon of a day in which there weren't any traffic stops, or if they were coming into dispatch but I somehow missed them, which is also possible because it was a very fast-paced office. I think that's worth looking into. I think if the traffic stops aren't being reported to dispatch, I think that's of substantial interest to our group. I have a question for Police Chief Lewis, and then I have 3 other questions that I think it will be more efficient if I write to the department so that I can organize my questions in a better way. But the one I want to ask now concerns reasons why officers who've been hired don't complete probation. We've heard that about 1/5 to 1/4 of probationers don't complete that period. And that's a pretty substantial number. And I expect there are others who are not let go from probation, but who choose to resign during the probationary period. That would make the number who failed to complete it even higher. So I would like to ask Chief Lewis if she could estimate for us what the 3 most common reasons are for employees not making it through probation.
It really varies. Sometimes it's the ability to multitask. Sometimes it's the report writing skills aren't there. Sometimes a person just in a classroom environment is able to manage work and understand the law, but just can't then apply it when they're having to deal with a stressful situation. Those are the ones we see most often. Is just you know, the applying the skills does not meet the needs, you know, of the pace of our agency. And sometimes those officers can't make it through our program, but are able to make it into a city that doesn't have the call volume that we do.
Then I do have one more question. To what extent are you able to and do check up on the prior police employment history of people who apply to the department, who may be concealing the fact that they've been in trouble in prior law enforcement employment?
I think still got Captain Durbin on the line, and he has extensive experience with both backgrounds and personal training, and he may be able to provide you some information on that.
Yeah, I think it's connected to a question I heard earlier. And so many times, yeah, somebody will just be released from probation and they're just simply released. So it's really imperative upon the background investigators. We are still trying the best we can, even with limited resources, and it's an ancillary duty, but we use our own personnel to do the background investigations for sworn hires. And we choose to do that because we know it's a very thorough background that we can keep checking in on with those officers on a regular basis, because they really have to dig and see, well, what was the specific reason that somebody was released? Because the other agency is probably just going to say, as we do, that somebody was released during the probationary period. And so it really comes down to an extremely thorough background and talking to the field training officers, talking to other officers. We have to dig. It's in the background.
Okay. Thank you. I'll put my other questions in writing, which will be more efficient.
Thank you. Commissioner Malavito.
Hey, folks. Thank you so much, Chief, and also Berkeley Police Department staff for being here and presenting. Let's see. I want to word this in a way that is helpful and I think maybe can get us start talking about some important things that I think could lead to some recommendations. I think from the presentation today and also something that Chair Mizell brought up earlier, which was the Police Review Commission survey, you know, there is like a lack of community engagement that has historically just been a part of, you know, anything that's been front facing regarding policing, and also through the Police Review Commission. I mean, some of the survey results, I don't know if you folks have had a chance to read it, but as was said, many people didn't know what it was, are somewhat familiar with it, or didn't know it existed, ever heard of it. Most people that respond to the survey had never submitted a complaint. And many people who didn't submit complaints said that, you know, there is a mistrust of the process. So now that we're looking into the Police Accountability Board, and many of us in the community have been in discussion with some of the appointed folks who are poised to be members of the Police Accountability Board, we're really asking questions about building inroads with the community so that we're not sort of in this position where we don't know why it's not working. We'll know in the moment because we'll have a feedback loop with the community that it's not working or that they don't trust it. I really appreciate the discussion that's been going around about, you know, mainly, you know, what are some of the, you know, things that the police department is doing to engage the community and build those relationships. And while I do find those helpful, certainly, and you know, I applaud them, I think when it comes to the oversight and the changes that come, that will be coming through the Police Accountability Board and their recommendations, which, you know, they have a really big sort of broad scope of work in which they will be focusing on, that is going to be around not only making recommendations around the budget, but also being the liaison in many ways of these complaint systems and interactions between the police department and the community. There's a whole lot to say about why the community doesn't trust the police department. We can all go in circles and talk about why that is. Many of us know why. But I guess what I'm trying to get to is if there is an interest for commissioners today to maybe discuss what that could look like. How do we build a system within the city that has, or through the Police Accountability Board, as a recommendation from this body to establish a permanent sort of inroad to these systems? Right now, many of us are scrambling and working together with our community partners to get these community engagement pieces of the task force together with listening sessions, the survey. And this small period of time, I think, in many ways is wonderful, and it sort of challenges all of us to work together, but this shouldn't be it, right? It should be something that's ongoing. And I don't think it should live with the police department. I think in many ways, it can be a charge of the Police Accountability Board in the way that it functions. But as I said before, many people, at least the community members that I work with directly, they don't even know what the Police Accountability Board is or what the PRC was. And that's important because I've had conversations with folks that work at PRC, and the folks who have submitted complaints have seen things through and it works effectively. And, but if folks, one, don't know that it exists, don't trust it, even if it works, then it doesn't work having it in the first place. So I guess, sorry for going on this sort of a rant. I'm in Houston and it's pretty hot. So this conversation has been going on a little longer in my head, but I guess that's just, what I'm putting up to my fellow commissioners is to, if this is something that we can really take on as a recommendation to building a system that has inroads with the community, and it's not just through a complaint process, but is a robust educational and really a partnership with the community, so that we're not looking at these survey results and wondering what went wrong.
I will just share for the task force, for those who are interested, I believe our Police Accountability Board will be holding their first meeting next Wednesday, July 7th, and certainly everyone here is invited to attend and participate. And Miss Catherine Lee, who's the Police Review Commission officer, was recently appointed by City Council as the new interim director of police accountability. So certainly you all are invited to participate and attend in those meetings. And I believe Chair Mizell is one of the members.
Yes, please feel free to join us. It will be new for me too, so I'm excited to get that process started. Commissioner Malvito, you had any additional comments?
No, I guess seeing if there's anyone who's interested in dialoguing about what I raised.
Well, I definitely would be. One of the components for the Fair and Impartial Policing Group, was this conversation about, first, how can we make the complaint process just more available for folks? And one of the recommendations there was, some sort of online system that's easy to fill out quickly. You can pull up on your phone after an encounter, or have it on the back of a business card. And I thank the chief for starting to move in that direction. But yeah, I'd have to have a long conversation about it, and how we can, beyond the structural part of it, get folks more connected. Yeah, so it's always, feel free. Okay, Commissioner Lutzker.
So thanks, Chief, for coming once again, and to everybody else for being here to present to us. So I didn't go on a ride along or sit in, but I did spend some time last week speaking both to Officer Matt Yee as well as to Lieutenant Tate in the Traffic Bureau. which was really helpful. So thank you to whoever helped facilitate those conversations, including David and Shamika and Chief, whoever did that. That was really, really helpful. I came out with a lot of takeaways around the way BPD is looking at their data, some of which were heartening and others of which were concerning. I guess one thing is, you mentioned, Chief, this evening that there's proposed funding. I think it's in the budget that just passed. I don't know, I can't keep track of all the timing of everything, for the analyst positions. I think that's really great. I will say one of my key takeaways from my discussion with Officer Yee was that he's just totally overwhelmed in terms of the amount of data that needs to be looked at, and that he's just one person. Like we talked about the team, and he's like, I am the team. And so, to me, I'm glad that the way that City Council came down was that they're holding positions vacant right now, because I actually think that until there's more data analysis for us all to understand what is really happening in the city and really be able to track it, that just putting more boots on the ground in a super strategic way is not the best use of public resources. So I'm really glad to hear that there are more folks working on data analysis. I'm also really glad to hear about the dashboard. Officer Yee and I spoke about that. One question I have is whether, there is going to be community engagement around what folks would be interested in seeing on the dashboard. Another way of kind of involving the community, because as you kind of discussed, Chief Lewis, you would be putting the data up there, and then other people can analyze it if they want to challenge it. But I think rather than taking that kind of sort of confrontational approach, I wonder if there would be a way to somewhat avoid some of that and ask people, what is it that you want to see?
No, absolutely 100%. We certainly don't want to create something in a vacuum thinking we're going to hit a mark that's not wanted or needed by our community. And I certainly didn't by any means intended to be a confrontational piece. It's much more that I understand people are going to want to see the raw data no matter what we do. And, data, as you know, can tell a lot of different stories, but we know that the more data we have, the more information we can try to glean from it. And so it's a fantastic idea, and absolutely that kind of engagement to ask people what they want to see, and kind of look historically at our Public Records Act requests about the kinds of ways that people have asked for our data is a great step. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, that'd be great. I didn't mean to imply that you were intending it as confrontational, but I think if you do it in a vacuum, that you just avoid that issue. One of my other big takeaways actually from my conversation was about kind of the total lack of conversation around data analysis between Officer Yee and the kind of crime reporting and other data analysis, like stop data analysis, and the collision data in the Traffic Bureau. And that's actually, I started out talking to Officer Yee, and I was like, okay, now let's talk about the collision data. And he was just like, yeah, I don't do that. I don't know anything about it. And so that's why I ended up talking to Lieutenant Tate, which was great. But that to me is concerning. And it's concerning because I think, again, it kind of speaks to a lack of understanding of the fact that the collision data is actually providing you all the information that you need to best decide about traffic stops. And Lieutenant Tate did say that there's some analysis of the collision data that by beat to try to figure out where officers need to be assigned. But that I think up until recently, there isn't really an examination of the types of stops that result in, serious and fatal collisions, and how that should inform your stop data. And so I guess it's less of a question, and I don't know whether the analysts that you're hiring intend to incorporate any analysis of collision data as well, or whether again that is going to remain totally separate. But just kind of an observation and a question about that.
Just a couple things to share. Very specifically, the information that I produced or provided and direction that I provided for our officers that are working patrol was based on the collision data from our traffic bureau about those very specific identified violations that had that causal connection to serious fatal collisions. That's the information that we provide, and we provide them the list of the top ones. And while we intentionally didn't focus directly on locations of high accidents, because we didn't want to oversaturate an area and over police an area with citations based just on that. Instead, we focused on the serious violations and told all officers on their particular beat to do that work on their beat in the areas that, the main thoroughfares of their beat.
Okay.
And absolutely, yeah, the whole goal
great.
about adding the analyst is it's a lot of work for one person. It's going to be a lot of work. We have a lot of data and a lot of information we need to understand from our data. And that's the whole idea behind kind of combining these analysts together and doing that work. There are some reporting requirements that the traffic bureau has to do to Switzers and some of those things. So that's where some of the separation exists. But now we have some help for Officer Yee. We're going to try to build a team that can really do that important work.
Okay, that would be great. I really appreciate that, starting to move in that direction of actually combining the data from one as a driving force for how to do your other work. So thank you. Okay.
See, Commissioner Fine.
Yeah, I just, I was having so many thoughts about this sit along. And so I think maybe I wanted to share a couple things. I was there for 3.5 hours and everybody was incredibly thoughtful and educated me as much as they could. And it was interesting. I think I've spent every other week since January on the SCU steering committee, and I've been on the mental health commission. I'm in my 4th year. And there's just a lot of perception from different groups that isn't on the same page in terms of approach and framework, I think, to some extent. Through the Mental Health Commission, we pretty thoroughly researched best practices in crisis response and looked at the alternative models. And a lot of them are contained in the report that the National Institute issued, which I've thoroughly read. And when we're talking about this reimagining, I think there really is a structural issue that everybody's going to have to wrap their head around. And what occurred to me after the sit along, and this is because I'm really, I find Austin, Texas's dispatch model really appealing. First of all, why is emergency 911 in the police department? I mean, some of these cities are pulling the communication center out of the police department because it's not a police emergency, it's emergency. And in Austin, they say, what is your emergency? Police, fire, or mental health? And they have a mental health clinician on dispatch, like a mental health, substance use, homeless desk. And that's what I kind of thought, when I was in the room, maybe that would really help, because there were a lot of calls that were mental health and substance use and homeless calls. And interestingly enough, they weren't able to show me stats, which are public information, but the wellness checks were on the 27th of June, 233. And what's so interesting about it is we, as the Mental Health Commission, this began when Bunachimo was chair, gathering caseload statistics from the Division of Mental Health. And for the 5150s in May, there were 31 that were done co-responder and 7 were holds requiring involuntary transport. So to me, it's there's this big group of incidents, because both the police and the mental health division refer to them as incidents, that are wellness checks that probably have a lot of nuance and subtlety, but a lot of them could probably be done by the SCU. And both the Division of Mental Health and dispatch and the police department, when you look at that co-responder model, the first thing is to secure the scene, and then the mobile crisis workers go in, and SCU is going to flip that around. It's going to be mental health. So how are all the SU steering committee, the Reimagining task force, the police department, fire, the Division of Mental Health going to get on the same page to where we're starting to look at this with some nuance and being able to unpack it in a way that we can have a non-police crisis response and people can build rapport and work together, because it's not going to work if there isn't buy-in. I really thought people were working very hard all during the sit-along. I mean, I was absolutely mesmerized by the amount of work that was getting done. But from being in all these different environments, I can see where people have different lenses in the way they look at things. And we have some very strong people with different positions on stuff. So I'm just like, how are we going to get together and do this?
Yeah, I think it for me, it really comes down to sort of being willing to sit in the room, right? And get all the right people in the room and have the conversations and understand the ways that we best collaborate and to understand what the needs are and understand the data, right? And set up the systems in place to succeed. And certainly, you know, we actively would love to have additional resources and tools to use to provide the best care to our community. And you know, you hit it on the head that a lot of people are doing work around this and are looking for answers. And there's some polarized opinions, and I think polarized opinions get us in the way of making real progress. You know, and that's what our goal is. I know my goal is for us to find real progress and come away with some recommendations that actually make life better for our community members.
Yeah,
and just
you know,
really
even
pragmatically, Commissioner Fine, just to speak really pragmatically about what's happening, you know, in the organization. So we have a team that consists of Chief Lewis, Dr. Varhus, our fire chief, our city manager, city attorney, et cetera. And we meet weekly to the extent that we can to coordinate all this work. And so we are super eager to understand what the specialized care unit is going to look like and the parameters of what that pilot program will actually consist of, because that will enable us to then have a conversation about what does dispatch have to look like and how does it have to be trained in a manner to respond to calls and to dispatch the calls. So we are coordinating across departments every week to try to figure out how all this would come together, you know, piece by piece.
Yeah, I think on the ground, what concerns me is there are some polarized opinions that aren't on that senior City of Berkeley staff level. This has got to work on the ground. And I'm just hoping that people can have that conversation there. And I'll put it this way, I work in a public library and some of your regulars are my regulars. And so it's like, how do we figure out how to get the best services to those folks? Because they're needing help in a lot of places.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Opton, do you have another comment?
I do. I want to mention something that may be little known, but could have a really substantial effect on the use of the citizen complaint process. Some years ago, I went through what appeared to me to be a yellow light, but the police officer right behind me thought it was red and gave me a ticket. And on this occasion, I had a complaint in my mind, which was that the officer was very, very arrogant and nasty, as if something was on his mind, because I was not being a problem for him, but he was a problem for me. I thought he wasn't acting appropriately. And I thought of filing a complaint. But I decided I'm going to wait until after the going through a red light ticket is adjudicated in the court, because if I wait, maybe the officer won't come to court. And that's what happened, not only with my case, but with most of the traffic cases that day, that the officers didn't show up in court, and so the cases were dismissed. And so I thought I probably made a good decision to wait to file my complaint. And then I went to the Berkeley Police Department and proposed to file the complaint, but found out that the time for filing it had expired, that there's a policy that I hadn't known about, that complaints are accepted only for a certain number of days, and it wasn't all that many days. And it occurs to me that that's a problem that probably or may very well cut down substantially on the number of complaints that are filed by people who have more serious confrontations with the police and more serious accusations against them. That they realize that if they file promptly, it would be a stimulus to the police to be more angry with them. And but if they may not know that if they put it off, the departmental policy will be that they're out of luck.
Yeah, I just want to mention, Commissioner Upton, that was another big issue with the PRC, and then with the PAB. That period of time would be longer than it's been in the past by about 60 days. Still, it's relatively, I mean, 6 months can be relatively short depending on the incident. If you're waiting for something to go through court, I know in terms of criminal cases, the timeline or the complaint timeline can be told for criminal cases. So for instance, if a late complaint were to come and someone's, was facing some type of charge from that incident, we can still investigate that complaint. Though with the traffic ticket, it probably is slightly different. But thank you for bringing that example. And that's partially helped with the PAB, but completely a valid point. And I have a quick comment. Is it possible we could go pull up the slide with the with the complaints, the graphs and the statistics on the complaints? Do we have that?
Yeah, you're talking about the over the past 5 years. What was up?
Yes.
Until that time? Yeah.
Yes.
Get that for you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so just for really the purpose of the public and my fellow commissioners, and again, I don't see this as some purposeful thing, but I do think it should be mentioned out of these numbers that for a complaint to be sustained under the PRC, the standard of proof has been clear and convincing evidence. This is a standard that was generally unusual for commissions and police review bodies of this type. Because of this high standard of proof, invariably there are going to be more complaints which are not sustained, because the options we have on these boards are sustaining the complaint, not sustaining the complaint, saying the complaint was unfounded, like basically none of what was described occurred, are exonerated. So the evidence pointed very clearly that the complaint just wasn't correct at all, and that act hadn't taken place, or might have even been the opposite of that act. So with the not sustained complaints, many things could fall under that, which simply the board of inquiry at the time did not feel that the evidence met the clear and convincing standard of proof, which is a very high standard. It's a high bar to reach. It's just one bar under, beyond a reasonable doubt. So I do think that should be mentioned, and hopefully in the future, if there are presentations, of 20, 30 minutes in length, where we're going to break down all these processes, I think that should also be explained, because I think naturally that's probably confusing to the public. It's like, are these complaints just completely invalid? Are they? But a large, I can't say that. Part of the reason is because of that standard of proof that has changed with the PAB, the standard will be preponderance of evidence, which is a lower standard and easier for complainants to meet. So, I mean, that's one factor in this data. And Chief, I wanted to ask you a question on really your training for, you know, new officers and officers who are on their probationary period. You know, the case that really stuck with me was the shooting this summer, or last summer now, with Officer Miller. And I believe Officer Miller had previous experience at some other police department for a couple of months. Was it Hercules? I think it was Hercules. And then came here and had been here for about, I believe about 8 to 9 months when the shooting happened and ultimately led to her release. You know, one of the things mentioned within the IA findings, and you know, this was the wording, you know, of your internal affairs was Officer Miller stated that she believed that it was necessary to prevent the escape of, and it links out the 2 individuals involved because we police took an oath to do our job expeditiously and that we do not retreat. And on this particular case, that was the finding of your internal affairs, what they thought of Officer Miller's statements. So, you know, when I read something like that, you know, I immediately think that's totally warrior mentality, totally, you know, traditionally how people have thought police officers should operate. But obviously in this case, it led to a very negative outcome and ultimately led to her being released. And thank goodness the suspects in this case are still alive. But when you see something like this, you know, how does it either change your training or, you know, when we see something that deals more with like a cultural, like how you think about your job and less so the procedure, how do you strive to address that? And have there been any changes since this incident? I know you were not chief at the time of this incident, but
right, just a couple of things there. You know, I think what you're quoting was Officer Miller's statement about why she acted the way that she acted under the circumstances that were presented to her. I haven't read that entire packet, so but that's my understanding. And just to be clear, we do not train that retreat is not an option. We do not train that type of warrior mentality. In fact, we actively train about tactics being, if you can position yourself somewhere safer to create space and time and distance to have conversations with folks and resolve something without the use of force. That's something that's part of our force policy is where that's available and safe to implement, that it's expected as part of an officer's evaluation of how to best resolve a situation. So by no means is that something that's trained. That's something that they learn throughout the both the training process and follow-on range trainings and departmental trainings.
Yes, and I know that's the case. So obviously, you know, any one person can do something, but given that training, you know, given, you know, they went through the post-training, they went through all of that, they worked at another department for a few months and presumably had training there, hopefully, and then came here, had our additional training, and, you know, at least for some period of time had been a solo officer. And then we still see this mentality, you know. So I thank you for having the trainings that really harp on, you know, focusing on different ways of operating and ensuring that things like cover and, you know, realizing, you know, what is best needed in the situation or is taken into account. But, you know, it remains a concern for me, and ultimately a larger concern about how, you know, the department operates. Even after all those trainings, which again, I know many officers embrace those trainings and do well with them, but that we still see this very obvious mentality about how policing operates. And that might come from the academy, it might just be the person themselves. But I think we have to think about that when we have these conversations on mental health, BERCDOT, all the other aspects where, you know, there may be folks, you know, and I think you believe as well, better positioned to handle some of these responsibilities who come into the space with a different mentality. And again, not saying your officers all have this mentality. I know they don't. I spoke with many of them, but yeah, it really concerns me. It bothered me at the time when I saw it. Still bothers me now, I think, and so I'm bringing it up. But yeah, I do hope that continues to be looked at, and that probationary training and training for new officers, how they think about their job and operate in space, because I fear this outcome could have been different if this person had not been a probationary officer. Fortunately, they were, as part of the process. Yeah, I guess that's more comments, but I did feel it should be said. One other question. So yeah, so I think about how I want to phrase this best. Yeah, I don't. Do y'all have the statistics on the number of officers who seek Calica appeals? Is that a public information, or would that also be in a personnel file?
I'd have to defer to Sergeant Cummings or Jones if they know the specific answer. My guess is it's a part of the appeal process for disciplinary activity that it would fall underneath the pull bar rights.
Yeah, Sergeant Cummings here. Caloca is actually an appeal process for the Police Review Commission. And within my time period, I'm only aware of 2 that have gone to Caloca. So it doesn't happen very often. And in my last 4 years, it's only gone to Caloca twice.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. Because I know, at least in the earlier half of the 2010s, that was at least relatively common for the commission to see that, and potentially, the commission's findings be overturned. But yeah, thank you. Yeah, those are my questions for right now. Commissioner Ejigu.
Thank you, Chairman. I suppose I don't actually have a question, but it's more of a comment that Chairman Mizell had kind of touched on earlier about the complaints that are not actually reported, or the grievances that don't turn into formal complaints, if you will. And one of the reasons Chairman Mizell mentioned was that some people didn't think it would make a difference if they complained. What wasn't mentioned was something that popped into my mind about fear of retaliation, or just being on cops' radar as like, oh, that's that person that complained about something that they should have just kept their mouth shut about. I don't know. That's just in my mind. But I do also want to mention that I did get to go on a ride along, and that experience for me personally was very humanizing. I didn't see a force of people in uniform. I saw people who were like me and my peers and my neighbors and my mentors and fellow parents with pictures of their children on their desks. And I really appreciate it. And also, learning that, the people behind the uniforms, they have their sensitivities just like I do. And the experiences that they live while in uniform sit with each of them in different ways. I'm pleased to know that there is some kind of, checking in with one another, for the officers, both sworn and non-sworn, and the employees of the police department, for all that they experience and the things that they come across and all the things that they have to process. And then it made me wonder whether they know that about us too. And I don't mean to, please understand I'm coming with, I'm making these comments with nothing but positive intentions. But I understand that like officers in the police department have a job to do, and they are dealing with the public in times of crisis and trauma, and that our community out here, we're also trying to provide that check-in for one another as well. I guess that's the extent of my comment for now, but for all in all, it was a very humanizing experience, and I would love to have officers ride along with me someday and see what my day-to-day is like. Not that interesting, but I learned a lot, and I'm really grateful for that experience. And yeah.
Yeah, I'm really happy to hear that. And I will say, you make a really valid, great point, which is, a good reminder to us as we do our work, that we may deal with crises and worst case situations on a regular basis, but for the person experiencing that, that is maybe the very first time they've had that kind of experience. And just, it's always good to hear sort of this kind of heartfelt conversation where we can actually hear and understand, and with each other those experiences. I think that's where understanding and progress forward really happens. So I really appreciate your comments.
All right. Commissioners, any other comments, questions at this time? Seeing, nope, the Commissioner Fine.
I just wanted to emphasize, I thought people were so professional and committed and trying to do the right thing. I don't know that everybody has the same perspective, but I felt the same way. And it really was humanizing.
Okay, Mr. Wright, can we go to public comment, please?
Yes, I can do. There are no hands raised at the moment.
Okay, any other questions, comments, commissioners? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. Commissioner Malvito, go ahead.
Hey folks, yeah, I thank you so much for the discussion. I just want to highlight that Commissioner Walker and Commissioner Polk are not with us. And my guess is that they, with an excess of absences or something of the sort, but they're not here. And I think maybe it's important that we acknowledge that, they're not present as members of they were appointed by the Youth Commission as well as the Berkeley Community Safety Coalition. It's important that, we have those voices here. And I just wanted to, raise that some folks may not be super up to date on how commissions work. Certainly, this is the first commission I've ever been on. And, I think there might be some issues there, and I'm just hoping that we're able to bring them back or have a dialogue with them so that they have an opportunity to, come back if they so choose, if not working with the Communities Safety Coalition or the Youth Commission to elect someone else. But again, I think it is really important that we just recognize that we don't have those two commissioners here this evening.
So we are a bit off topic, so I'll be careful, but I will just say that it's up to the appointing body to replace those individuals, and I believe Commissioner Polk is going to seek to be reappointed to the Youth Commission, but that is up to Commissioner Polk's discretion. And in terms of Commissioner Walker, yeah, we will have to reach out to the Berkeley Community Safety Commission, and they will have to appoint someone who can meet the attendance standards for commissions in the city of Berkeley.
David, Berkeley Community Safety Coalition has talked about it, and I believe that you'll begin getting a name.
Great. And Chair, there are 3 hands raised now.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Malvito. Yes, we should get in contact and hopefully we can bring them back. But yeah, let's go to public comment.
Okay, I'll bring the first person in, which is Kelly Hammergren. Kelly, you should be able to speak.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I went to my computer because you didn't see it. So I'm on my iPad and I'll take the other one down when I finish. I had a question here for Deputy David White. When Margaret Fine was talking about how we have very strong people with different positions and really a lot of perceptions and how to bring this all together. And then David White, you mentioned that the city manager and the city attorney and Dr. Warhouse and the chief and you and some others who I didn't quite catch are all meeting on putting together this structure, this different structure for how policing and SCU and all this and mental health and all this is going to be handled. I mean, this sounds a little confusing, but what's the purpose of the Reimagining task force if there is this group of our city leadership, which is meeting separately and independently and not communicating with the task force? I mean, I thought the whole purpose of the task force was to use the expertise of the people on the task force to really do the reimagining. And yet it sounds like there's something going on completely separate without the task force. So that was my comment. And it didn't look like this meeting was being recorded when I was looking at it on my iPad, but it does look like it is being recorded when I look at it on my computer. Could you confirm?
And Chair, I can just quickly clarify what Ms. Hammergren's talking about. So I was responding, Kelly, to a comment from Commissioner Fine about how all the pieces of the SCU are going to come together. So the steering committee through the Mental Health Commission is actually leading the effort to design the specialized care unit, where city staff actually are not designing that for them. What I'm referring to is the process of coordinating once they have that design pilot program. How is that going to integrate with the other pieces of the organization, such as dispatch and fire? You know, once they determine what kind of calls they're going to go to, we have to coordinate with the police so they're not overlapping, stuff like that. So no one's doing any of the work on their behalf. They have their responsibilities, and we are interacting with that. The next hand is Emily Ragusa.
Great, thank you. That's a relief. My hand has been raised for a couple hours, but maybe there was a Zoom glitch. These are now things that were talked about a couple hours ago, but I appreciated the comment of the question from the commissioner about the reporting schedule. When are reports going to be made about the data? And it was my understanding from covering the council referral on fair and impartial policing data, stop data, that they did ask for quarterly reports. Now, this was under the prior chief. I don't know what the plan is going forward, but their item that they approved asked for quarterly reports. So I hope that does happen in some manner. And I know the chief mentioned that BPD does crime reports twice a year. Historically, that was true. I've been covering BPD since 2012, but in recent years, there's only been one crime report. I know this is because of capacity issues, but there's only been a report in September for the last few years. So we are coming up closer to that, but it would be nice to go back to twice a year at the very least, and also to see quarterly reporting as required on the stop data by the council item. The other just quick thing about process, I can't see any of you guys right now. I'm sure you are listening to me, but all I can see is the timer and my name. So that's a Zoom setting. I don't think it's a great setting. Also at times, there are times when I've only been able to see like 4 or 5 of you because folks have their cameras off, folks aren't here. I don't know which commissioners are here. And I just think from a transparency perspective, that's difficult. I don't have the option to change settings to see who's not on video. So I think the public would at least like to know which commissioners are attending, and maybe that can be adjusted in the future. Thank you guys.
I do not see any other raised hands, and let me just scroll down in case I missed anyone or anything. No, I don't see anything, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other items we need to discuss tonight? Okay, seeing none, I will motion to adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn.
Thank you so much, everybody.
I'm already kind of adjourned.
But only we need the roll call. So
we need to roll call, everyone. 1 second. Commissioner Fine?
Yes.
Commissioner Jigu?
Yes.
Vice Chair Chima?
Yes.
Commissioner Blake? Absent. Commissioner Lindheim?
Yes.
Commissioner Dangerfield? Absent. Commissioner Ghosh?
Yes.
Commissioner Hyde?
Yes.
Commissioner Malvito?
Yes.
Chair Mizell?
yes.
Commissioner Opton?
Yes.
Commissioner Harger?
Yes.
Commissioner Diaz?
Yeah.
Commissioner Lutzker?
Yes.
Commissioner Ho? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. Have a good night.
All right. You guys have a good night.